Unit 1. Listening. Page 11.
So, Candela, what's it like working for a large car manufacturer?
You'd be surprised, actually. You hear so much about cutthroat competition amongst managers in my type of company, but in fact, as someone starting out on the management ladder, I get a lot of backup from senior staff. We have twice-weekly get-togethers where we talk through our difficulties and come up with ideas and solutions. It's great. I don't get the feeling that it's sink or swim at all.
And you, Henry?
Well, as you'd expect, working in hospital administration, there's plenty of red tape. We have to stick to the rules fairly carefully because at the end of the day, people's health's involved. And we're publicly accountable. But that doesn't mean there's no room for inventiveness. We're always looking for ways of streamlining procedures and making efficiency gains.
And saving taxpayers' money.
That's right.
Now, Sonia, what's it like working for a .com?
It's not exactly a .com. As a matter of fact, it's more a software developer. And it really suits me. You know, I nearly always turn up at work wearing jeans and a t-shirt, which is great for a manager. And everyone talks to everyone else in a really relaxed way. There's none of that them and us feeling between management and staff that you get in other industries. I mean, in most ways, the staff are more expert than the managers. And what about you, Omar?
My company, as you know, is a consumer products company, and we're all organised in divisions, and the divisions in teams, and we're all competing against each other. Our pay is performance-related, and nobody gets the same. Getting ahead and even keeping your job depends on your performance.
And how's performance measured, Omar? Is there a yardstick?
Not really. In the end, it boils down to performance in comparison with other teams and divisions.
Sounds quite a rat race.
For me, that's business.
Unit 2. Listening. Page 16. What do you think makes a great leader as opposed to a great manager? Because they're quite different things, aren't they?
And I think I've worked a lot of places where a lot of senior people haven't really been leaders, they've been managers. And I think I'd say probably a good leader has vision and can see how to develop and take things forward and is inspirational. Really, a manager, I think, is more about the implementation of that vision. And I think too many people who are in leadership roles get bogged down with the nitty-gritty management side, which is probably not what they should be doing. But I suppose it takes a strong leader and a confident one who believes in their team to take a step back. And I think really they should. I don't think they should be too hands-on.
Can you describe a bad leader to me?
I think someone who has a team of quite experienced, good people who won't give them the space to get on and do their job and is overbearing and involved and doesn't take a step back and give people the responsibility to get on with their role. And I suppose who doesn't give a person room to grow and the opportunity to develop their career, because I think that happens a lot, that you just are expected to tick along and not expect anything back from your job, whereas if you're good at it and reasonably ambitious, you want to know you're going somewhere.
Unit 2. Listening. Page 17. How would you describe empowerment? And how can workers be empowered, do you think?
I think empowerment is giving someone the opportunity to decide the directional strategy of a job and agreeing on it, and then leaving them to get on and do it and be in the background to help them if they need it, but not to be breathing down their neck. And I suppose it is that feeling of responsibility and ownership that makes people feel empowered. I think if you work with someone who really lacks confidence to give their team responsibility, it's very difficult to break out of that cycle.
And has managing techniques, or have managing people, changed over in the last 10 years?
I don't know, I'm probably a bit cynical, but I think there's a lot, certainly that I've noticed in the organisations I've worked in, there are a lot of steps that are taken to be seen to be empowering individuals, and so I think things probably at a superficial level look to have changed, but whether they really have deep down, I'm not so sure.
How do you think people could be managed in order to get the very best from them?
I think to get the most out of them, you want them to feel empowered, that they're achieving, that they're developing, that there are opportunities ahead of them that they can strive to work to, that they're under a manageable amount of pressure, that they're getting the right kind of support. I think what a lot of people lack is a kind of mentor and someone that will help them develop in their career, and you can become very stale if you don't have that. So I'd say that would be important to people as well.
Unit 3. Listening. Page 20.
So, we've seen a bit about how internal communications is quite a neglected area in business. Now, I'd like to go over to you and ask you if you have any ideas how it can be improved. Larry, what about you?
Well, I guess we all have a tendency to overdo things a bit. I mean, we think we have to reply immediately to everything that comes in, and it becomes a bit of a time waster, always sending off messages left, right and centre. I think it's probably better to have a fixed time. You know, that quiet time just after lunch or just before you knock off for the day, and deal with them then.
Well, possibly. I guess this might depend on the type of job you're doing. Still, that's something we can discuss in a minute. And you, Marina?
I'm very interested in the quality of the message. It says so much about the person, and if it's well written, it's a good deal easier to understand. So I'd say to people that they should avoid incomplete sentences or sentences without verbs, when writing, of course. Good English creates a good impression.
An interesting point. And that's another one we can come back to. I mean, it might depend who you're writing to and what you're writing about. What's your advice, Magdi?
Mine's a question of respect for colleagues and basic working formality. If you're busy, you can be sure that most of your colleagues are too, so they don't want you barging into their offices without warning with some minor query or being continually phoned up. Let them get on with their work, and if they're not urgent, save your queries for coffee time.
Thanks, Magdi. That's partly a time management question, isn't it? Now you, Therese.
I just think common courtesy is such an important part of office life. Greeting people when you arrive at the office, not losing your temper or shouting at people, however overworked you may feel. You have to work with each other, and you might as well make the circumstances as pleasant as possible.
I absolutely agree. So now let's take these points one by one and see how you all feel about them. Now, the first one was about...
Unit 4. Listening. Page 23. 1.
Okay, let's get started. Has everyone got a copy of the agenda?
Yes, thanks. Yep.
Great. Would anyone like to take minutes, or shall we just keep a list of action points?
Action points would be fine, Matt.
Okay, Piotr. Would you like to do that then?
Sure, no problem.
Thanks. So anyway, thank you all for coming. The purpose of this meeting's to discuss how we go about investigating the East European market and seeing whether our products would have an outlet there. So the first point today is who should actually go and have a look around. I personally am pretty tied up till the end of May, so it might be better if it was someone else. Jane, could you give us your views on this?
Sure, thanks, Matt. I honestly don't think it's that urgent. I mean, it can easily wait till June, which is less than a couple of months away, and then we can make sure we have enough time.
2.
So, if I could just sum up, what you think is that even if he hasn't been on time this time, as a customer he's too valuable to lose, so we should remind him, but in a very friendly and polite way.
That's right. I mean, he really does give us a lot of business. Although, as you can see from the books, if something doesn't happen soon, we're going to have problems with our cash flow. I mean, we've got our invoices to pay as well.
Point taken. Let's remind him and give him another week then.
Fine.
Anything else to be said on this, or can we move on to the next point?
3.
So quite frankly, I don't think it's good enough. I mean, we agreed to have the new procedures in place by the end of the month, which is in 2 weeks' time, and we're going to be nowhere near that target because the people responsible for training haven't even scheduled the training yet.
Thanks very much for that, Salim. Now, can we hear what other people have to say?
Yes, it's all very well to criticise, but we've had plenty of problems, you know. In my last job, people used to just criticise. I had a boss who
Look,
constantly...
that's all very interesting, but can we keep to the issue in hand? The point is, there is a risk, and it would be bad to have an accident just when we've fallen behind with our training schedule. So let's get to the reasons for it and see how we can get things back on the rails.
4. So we clearly all agree on this, so let's not waste any more time and move on to point number 5, which is whether the component really meets our specifications. Any thoughts on that? Anyone? Martin?
It clearly performs to specifications. All the tests I've run so far show that. It's just that we might have difficulty fitting it into the space we thought we had for it. It might mean we have to do a little bit of redesigning.
So, in a nutshell, what you think is that it's too large.
Well, it might be, but if they can't make it smaller, then we'll have to make do with it.
But that would add to our costs. I mean, redesigning our machine at this stage has all sorts of other implications.
I know, but the alternative is to source the component elsewhere, and I don't even know if that'll be possible.
I wonder whether it'd be worth it just for one relatively minor component.
We'd have to look into that.
Well, we don't have to decide on this today. Let's think about it a bit more and come back to it, if necessary, next week. Now, let's take a 5-minute break and then start on point number 6. 5.
So, we need more information on this issue. Sandra, can you look into it for the next meeting?
Sure.
So, in summary, we've agreed about where we're going to stay, and Sandra's going to investigate prices, which potential customers we're inviting, and what entertainment we're going to give them. So, we're just left with the question of the timing of the event. Any ideas, anyone?
I don't think we want to get everyone together when it's too hot. So, I guess spring would be most suitable.
Yes, because if we're going to do it in January or February, really that's too soon.
Yes, if it was up to me, I'd go for April.
OK, let's come to a quick decision on this. How many people are in favour of April? 5. Anyone against? No. Well, thanks all of you for your time. I think this has been very profitable, and we'll meet again to talk about the other points on Wednesday the 4th at the same time. See you all then.
Unit 5. Listening. Page 30.
Boris Shulov, we hear a lot nowadays about customer relationship management, or CRM for short. Can you tell us what it is?
Yes, in simple terms, customer relationship management is the process of integrating marketing, sales, and after-sales service within a business or other organization with the objective of ensuring that customer relationships generate maximum profitability for the company, while in the process maintaining and enhancing those relationships. In other words, by working on these relationships, we can produce more revenues for the company and provide a mechanism which permits companies to stand out or differentiate themselves from their competitors. What I mean by this is that nowadays, as we all know, the products companies produce are frequently almost identical, at least in the eyes of the consumer. And what gives a company a competitive edge is the difference in the quality of service it offers.
This is achieved largely by the use of computer technology, isn't it?
That's right. At the center of CRM are information systems. With computer technology, it's now possible to store and transmit huge amounts of data about individual customers. You know, their preferences, their free time activities, the makeup of their families, and any other details which you think are interesting or useful. And all this information can, at least theoretically, be acted upon by organizations to give their customers personalized individual treatment. To give you a rather basic example, your customer, Mrs. X, buys cosmetics from you. You know from information you've gathered that she has a teenage daughter. Perhaps she'd also like to buy cosmetics for her daughter. You could interest her in a younger range of products, maybe.
In which areas of an organisation is CRM most likely to be used?
Well, clearly in those areas which have most contact with customers. To give you a few details, there's marketing automation, which allows you to concentrate your marketing efforts on your most profitable customers and manage your campaigns so that your marketing budget is spent in the most cost-efficient and profitable way. You've perhaps heard of the 20-80 rule, which says that 20% of your customers generate 80% of your profits. Now, the common sense conclusion to be drawn from this statistic is that we should be spending a larger proportion of our marketing budget on that 20% of customers to keep them happy, to encourage them to spend more with us and proportionately less on the remaining 80%.
Interesting. I've also heard of sales automation. Can you explain for all of us what that is?
Sure. Sales automation is information systems providing key backup for the sales process. For example, products a particular customer has bought in the past, discounts they've been given, problems that have arisen when selling to that client, etc. All this makes the sales staff's task much easier. They can offer similar discounts. They're not going to make a mess by offering a far larger or far smaller one. At least, not unless it's part of an informed strategy. They know about problems which have arisen in the past, and they can avoid irritating the customer by repeating them. Then there's the final area.
Customer service, isn't it?
That's right.
Can you explain it a little, please?
Yeah, customer service as a part of CRM is being able to deal efficiently with problems and queries when they arise in such a way that they actually enhance the customer's feelings of loyalty and satisfaction. After all, the main thrust of CRM is to have loyal and satisfied customers. These are the ones who are most profitable to a company and who pass the company's reputation on by word of mouth to other potential customers.
The process must be very complex. How is all this data collected and transmitted with a large organisation?
The most normal way nowadays is via the internet, because this allows both employees and customers to access information and communicate with each other efficiently.
Very interesting. But I wonder, do organisations manage to handle these vast amounts of data efficiently and effectively? I would have thought these systems are fraught with pitfalls.
Unit 6. Listening. Page 32.
How does your company achieve an advantage over its competitors?
Well, I suppose the prime way you'd get an advantage is by offering sufficient quality at the lowest price. And clients are always looking for the lowest price tender. And nowadays, designers and consulting engineers have to compete a lot more on price than they had to maybe 30, 40 years ago. So price is certainly probably the major element. But in more recent years, there's been far more recognition by clients that actually the quality dimension is also needed. If you go for the lowest price, you may not get the best value for money. So now client procurement is much more directed towards getting the right match of quality and price. The result of that being is that when we're submitting tenders to clients to win work, we have to devote a lot of time to demonstrating the quality that we can bring to a particular project. And ways of doing that include the quality of our documents and what we say in our documents. It's also developing a reputation and having past projects that we can show clients and say, look, there's a fantastic quality job we did on that one. Why don't you employ us, because we've got the track record and experience.
Unit 6. Listening. Page 34.
So how would you describe the Giffords brand?
The Giffords brand, well, that's quite a tricky one. I think we're branded a lot by the past projects that we've worked on. So very much in projecting what we're about, we look towards recent projects which have been particularly successful. And one of those has been the Gateshead Millennium Bridge, for which Gifford had to enter a design competition, which was supervised by the Gateshead Metropolitan Council, and there were about 200 entrants, and Gifford teamed up with a leading architectural practice, Wilkinson Eyre and Associates, and jointly we came out with a completely new concept for a bridge. I don't think this type of bridge has ever been constructed before. This bridge had a horizontal axis, so that the entire bridge rotated horizontally to lift over the river to pass ships underneath. And this particular structure's got a lot of international attention since it's been built, and has been quite successful in promoting an image of Gifford more widely.
So you'd use this project as a means of obtaining further contracts, possibly?
Yes, so I think it has demonstrated our creativity and potential for innovation and problem solving in a way which others couldn't do.
That's very good. Just tell me, how do you or Giffords go about getting new contracts?
Well, I suppose one prime route is to look at advertisements, and nowadays within the European Union, all contracts or all public works over a certain size have to be advertised in the Journal of the European Union. So we keep an eye on that and identify contracts which look interesting to us. Other routes, apart from advertisement, and really a very important route, is through personal contact, and preferably through having done previous contracts with a client, establishing a relationship. And particularly if they're a private client or a private company, if they like the work that you've done previously, then they may feel there's no need to advertise. They'll come back to you for future work. And establishing those business relationships and friendly partnering relationships with clients is really vital.
And how would you go about deciding a price for your bid when you're in competition with others?
Well, with great difficulty. There's a number of ways you look at it. One is to assess what the value of the constructed works would be, and assess in percentage terms what a reasonable fee for a designer would be in relation to the ultimate value of the works as constructed. So that would be on a percentage basis or a top-down basis. The other main route would be bottom up, in terms of you itemise all the work, all the tasks that you have to do in order to prepare a design, prepare the contract document, the specifications, probably also supervise the construction of the works, or supervise the works construction contract. So you'd work out all the time on a spreadsheet from the bottom up and see what it comes to.
How many of the contracts that you bid for do you expect to win?
We'd expect to win about 1 in 3, 1 in 4 of straight competitive bids where we're competing maybe against 6 other similar consultants. We would hope to achieve that rate.
Putting together a proposal or bid must be expensive and time consuming. How do you cover the costs of this if you don't win the contract? Or is that just absorbed into a future contract?
The only way you can absorb the cost is out of fees earned on other contracts. So all tenderers have to effectively either recover their costs on other contracts or go out of business. It's as simple as that.
Unit 7. Listening. Page 36.
Nasim Bakhtiar?
Hi Nasim, Devika here.
Hi Devika, what's up?
I think it's time to get that proposal together for the board of directors. You know, we were talking around the subject last month when we were having our roundup of points arising from the sales conference. At least it was one of the things that we were talking about.
That's the proposal for a wider range of software, isn't it? Let me just note that down.
That's right. I've just been talking to Lena, and we were both saying that now could be the right time.
Right. Well, Lena's the finance director. Does she reckon we've got the budget for it?
Yes, that's the point. She says that since profits are definitely up this year, we should be looking to plough something back and reduce our tax exposure.
Okay, but the main reason for getting into a new project like this, and it would be a pretty big one, is that our existing clients have been asking for it. That would be the main selling point in the proposal. Our clients want a whole range of compatible applications, compatible with the stuff we're selling them at the moment.
Exactly.
Okay, and what do you want to see in the proposal, Davika?
The reasons for adding to the product range, I guess. I mean, our existing products do well enough, but with the cutthroat market we're in, it wouldn't look too good if we spent a lot of cash developing a whole load of new products which just lost us money.
Well, that doesn't sound too likely at the moment.
No. And could you also specify the types of product we are going to work on? You know, especially stock control tools and applications for automatic online ordering, that sort of thing.
Okay, those will do for a start anyway.
And you'll also have to cover resources in the proposal.
Yes, right.
I mean, this will mean quite a lot of people working on it, and it will swallow a fair amount of cash before we start getting any return on our investment. Fortunately, Lena will be keeping us to a tight budget, though.
Quite. But it would be useful to know what the extra costs involved in this are likely to be.
Okay, so you'd better include a section on them in your proposal, and then hopefully we should have everything pretty clear.
Great. When's the next board meeting?
Wednesday of the week after next. Do you think you can get your proposal together by then?
I'll try to get it ready by Friday of next week if possible, so we can mull it over a bit before giving it to the board, though I can't promise that. Otherwise, definitely by the Wednesday.
That sounds fantastic. Thanks a lot, Nasim.
My pleasure. I'll get cracking on this right away. I've been wanting it to happen for some time now.
Sure.
Anything else, Davika?
Not just now, Nasim. Thanks.
Okay. Bye then.
Bye.
Bye.
Unit 8. Listening. Page 40.
Good. Thank you all for coming. Shall we get started then? As you know, the purpose of our meeting is to start thinking about expanding our operations to China. Before getting down to the finer details, please remember that our discussions in this meeting are confidential, okay? So, Catalina's going to get the ball rolling by giving us a brief rundown of the Chinese market. Okay, Cathy?
Sure, Niels, thanks. Now, I'm just going to give you a number of key facts which should help you to concentrate your minds on the opportunities and difficulties of breaking into China. Okay?
Sure, go ahead.
Right. Well, I've got 3 main points to make. Firstly, the Chinese market, unlike markets here in Europe or the US, is growing steadily and rapidly, so it represents a major business opportunity. Last year, the total market in terms of ice cream sales was 23 billion yuan. That's about 2.3 billion euros. So pretty considerable. I've been reading recently that China is likely to overtake the USA as the leading market for consumer goods within the next 25 years. And when you take into account that the market growth rate is a steady 10% a year, you can see that there's an opportunity there if we can get in. Now, my second point. At the moment, there are 5 major players selling on the Chinese market, along with a lot of smaller local companies. These big ones have a market share between them of rather more than half, 57% to be exact, and that's split up between our usual competitors, Nestlé, Walls, that is Unilever, and Meadow Gold, with 30% of the market, and a couple of local companies, Yili and Mengnui. I'm not sure I've got the right pronunciation there, but anyway, they've got about 27% of the market. And now my third and final point, to give you a bit more background. In China, on average, people buy far less ice cream than in Europe. The annual purchase is about 1 litre a head, which is still a lot less than the 23 litres per head of the Europeans. So you can see that as Chinese incomes rise, ice cream consumption is a pretty hot prospect.
Thanks, Kathy. That was interesting. Now, any of you got any questions?
Yes. Katty, can you tell me how Chinese companies are reacting to this competition from abroad? And also how these competitors are going about increasing their market share?
Sure, Paul. I've got something on the biggest national manufacturer. That's Yili. Apparently, they recently announced plans to build more production facilities in different parts of the country. The reasoning behind this is logical. China is a huge country. The distances between major centres such as Shanghai, Beijing and Hong Kong are vast, so they'll then be able to save a lot on transportation costs. Also, if you have a factory in each region, along with a regional product development team, you can adapt your ice creams to regional markets more easily and thereby satisfy local tastes. That, I think, answers the first part of your question as far as I can. As to the second, while companies have been advertising pretty heavily, their main tactic for gaining more market has been to fight a fierce price war. Most products sell at about 1 to 2 yuan, which is between 10 and 20 cents. So you can imagine that even with cheap production costs, no companies as yet have been announcing big profits there.
Any more questions? Yes, Tanya.
Our products, as you know, are a bit more upmarket than the companies you've mentioned so far. I wonder what sort of price you think we could sell them at. What I want to know is how we would position them.
Unit 9. Listening. Page 48.
What, in your experience, is the best way to advertise?
That's a very difficult question to answer because there are different answers for different types of product. And in some cases, the most cost-effective can be the most expensive. So television still remains probably the most expensive medium, but is possibly the best way still of getting to people. And given that our biggest ambition is to sell as much product as we can, then we want to reach as many people as we can most effectively.
And is advertising always the most successful way of promoting a product?
Not entirely. I think there are a number of people who believe that a final decision about a brand is made actually at the point of purchase. So anything that can be done within the store to attract a person, whether it be some sort of promotional activity within the store, or something that actually sits on the shelf and attracts your attention, or just simply the price.
And who decides where something should be advertised?
We in a media company make that decision. We put together a proposal based on the size of the budget, which is a major factor because television is obviously the most expensive medium we can use. But also the sort of time of day or the sort of mood that the person is in will affect the place that we'll advertise. So for example, if we were advertising a cosmetic brand, we might think that women reading a glossy monthly magazine might find that a more appropriate place to see an advertisement for a cosmetic brand or a fragrance, for example. Whereas a fairy liquid might well be suited much more to the television and have less of an appeal to people reading a newspaper or a magazine.
And who decides when to go on air on television?
The media company would decide on that, and we would have a budget which would mean that we would have to buy a certain number of slots within prime time, which is generally from about 5:30 in the evening until about 10:30 in the evening. But then again, to get a broad range of potential consumers, we would advertise throughout the day. And, for example, the morning time is cheaper than evening time.
Unit 10. Listening. Page 50.
Good evening. I'm Serena Godby, and tonight on Your Computer, we're talking about how you can use the internet to buy things and what sort of things the internet can really help you to purchase. Now that questions of security and internet fraud are no longer such an issue, E-commerce and e-shopping are becoming an increasingly attractive option to both businesses and consumers. I have 5 people with me in the studio. The writer and broadcaster Bruce Myers, up-and-coming young actress Tanya Ballum, computer programmer Paddy Smith, Petra Ferrero, the fashion critic, and of course our regular expert on this programme, Salim Mahmood. Now, if I could just kick off by asking each of you about something you bought recently and why you used the internet to buy it. What about you, Bruce?
Well, you know, I use the internet quite a lot for my work. I research articles and the like, stuff on the economy, background facts and what have you. Anyway, I'd been thinking for some time that it was time for me to get away from it all and take a break. Normally I just call in at my local travel agents while I'm in the high street, and they book the tickets and send them round. Anyway, almost subconsciously, the other day, while I was reading the online edition of the Financial Times, I clicked on this banner ad just to see how much things might cost, you know. I certainly wasn't thinking of booking anything up there and then. Still, it came as a bit of a shock, I must say, to see how much cheaper things are online and how much money I could have been saving.
Yes, they say you can pick up some great bargains on the internet, but I still think that unless you shop around plenty, you can get taken for a pretty big ride.
Tell us about it, Tanya.
Well, before I buy something, I like to see it, touch it, get the feel of it, so I'm most likely to use the yellow pages online to find the local showroom and 1 or 2 others, which street they're in, that sort of thing. It's not bad because nowadays you can filter out pop-up boxes and such like. Then I go down there and check if they have any special offers, see what's going, perhaps kick the tyres and take a test drive if they'll let me. I mean, I don't think we'll ever want to make a purchase like that online, do you?
Well, not as yet, but you never know. It could come, I suppose. Paddy, you're next.
I've just changed jobs, and that's been a pretty big thing for me. It means I've had to move, and I've been using the web for checking out estate agents and what they've got in their books. See what's going on in the area, and look at a few photos before getting on the phone.
Petra, have you ever used the internet for shopping?
Not for shopping, actually. Last time I was in London, I bought a new PC, but they didn't have the one I wanted in stock, only a showroom model. So I arranged to have it sent on, which they did. I used my old one to check where it had got to and when it was arriving.
I think that's wonderful, actually, to be able to do that.
So do I, because at least I knew it was coming, even if it didn't get here any quicker.
Finally, you, Salim.
I've been thinking about doing one of those online degrees, you know. So initially I went to Google and typed in the words, and then actually I clicked on various sponsored links, which were pretty good, because, you know, they took me direct to more or less what I was looking for, and I was able to look at the different options and what they were offering, all in less than an hour. I mean, 10 years ago it would have taken me weeks.
Great. So let's go on from there and just consider together what options there are.
Unit 10. Listening. Page 53.
How can advertisers use the internet, do you think?
The internet is a difficult one for advertisers at the moment because it's so new that I don't think a lot of people know quite how to use it. People tend to use the internet for things that they're interested in. The places where the internet can be very successful are in areas where there is a high interest in the product involved. So, for example, the motor car industry, where you do a lot of research before you buy a car. Nowadays, most people do their research on the internet, and therefore to advertise on the internet is an obvious way to get people, when they're again in the right frame of mind, to be advertised to. And that can be just simply brand advertising, which tells people a little bit more about the car or redirects them to the website, which will give them more information, or it can be direct response advertising, which will encourage them to send off for a brochure or to ask for a test drive, which then gets them into the dealership in order to get the dealer himself then to persuade the customer that he might want to buy that particular model.
Can the internet be used to advertise normal household products as well?
There are ways that people try and get round that issue by the website or the advertisement on the internet actually trying to give a solution to something. And what I'm thinking of here is that Persil, for example, the manufacturer of detergents, has a part of its website which talks about tips and hints of how to get rid of stains out of clothes. So you might go and say, you might go into a search engine and say, I want to get rid of a stain on my shirt, a wine stain, and the search engine would then direct you to the Persil site, which would then possibly encourage you to buy Persil to get rid of that stain if it was the right solution.
So how would advertising on the internet increase sales or attract new customers?
I suppose in the same way that advertising in any medium will work. It's not a static medium, so it's probably mistaken to use static images on the internet. It's very much more akin to television in that respect, so that you can do a lot more with it. There's a lot of what are called viral ads being put out now by fairly normal major international companies who are making ads to look like they're spoof ads, but they're actually made by big advertising agencies at vast expense, because they might be a spoof on an existing ad, or they might do something that you wouldn't necessarily expect an advertiser to do. And then they're sent around to a few people who will then pass them on to 100 of their people in their mailing list, who will then pass them on and on and on. And that's an interesting way where advertising is developing, because at the end of the 30 seconds or whatever, you suddenly realise that it is actually a brand message.
If a business wanted to set up an e-commerce operation or sell its products over the internet, what would be the best way to go about it?
I think it depends very much on what brand they're trying to sell. The danger is that there are now so many different websites that it would be a very difficult thing, I think, to set up an e-commerce site from scratch that could be successful, because just about every market you would want is catered for. The main reason that people go to the internet, I think, is because they can shop around for price, and if you're offering something that offers people better value for money, then there's an opportunity then to attract people's attention. Otherwise, I think small companies trying to set up e-commerce nowadays would find it very difficult to achieve, because most of the major manufacturers in the world are now savvy to internet and setting up their own websites, which have a lot more money spent on them.
Unit 11. Listening. Page 55.
So, our company's been in existence for more than 15 years now. And during that time, we have, of course, I suppose just like everyone else, experienced big changes. Probably more than most industries. Our products have evolved, and our production processes have changed out of all recognition. Our customers have also become more savvy and more demanding. And the whole global marketplace has been transformed. So we've had to adapt our sales activities to meet the challenges. I mean, 10 years ago, most of our sales were done by sales staff making personal visits to prospects and explaining our products, how they worked, and their selling points. Now, all that area of activity has been declining because our customers know more now, and our products, of course, are much more intuitive, so there's not so much explanation needed. Sales by visiting reps have plummeted from about 40% to less than 20%. And another big change that you can see on the charts, although not quite so big, is that people just don't buy our software in shops so much these days. Over-the-counter sales volumes are about 10% lower than they were 10 years ago. On the other hand, though everyone hates being rung up about products, we find it surprisingly effective and comparatively cheap. Less time-consuming, no travel expenses. You know, what we do is actually call up prospects, that is, likely companies, potential customers, and make an intelligent sales pitch. Over the past 10 years, these sales have soared from just a tenth of our total to around a quarter of our products, which is pretty good. Our other big success story, I suppose, is fairly predictable because, of course, 10 years ago, few companies, well, or perhaps almost none, were online, and the whole concept of e-commerce was in its infancy. I'm proud to admit, though, that we were among the pioneers, and this has really now rocketed to become our most important sales activity. As a result, we can sell much higher volumes nowadays with just about the same staffing levels as a decade ago. That in turn means better margins, and these are really driving our profitability. The only other sales activity we do has been receding, and we're hard put to really know the reason. That's this one here, which has shrunk from 15 to just 3%. People just don't fill in coupons or write in for things anymore. I mean, we still advertise in the trade press and in specialist magazines, more than anything to maintain brand awareness, but I suppose people like to go online and find things through Google or some other search engine where they can download things instantly. Of course, people feel a bit more confident about using credit cards online as well.
Unit 12. Listening. Page 58.
Richard Slade speaking.
Hello, Mr. Slade. You don't know me. My name's Rosa Levy, and I work for CSS Security.
Okay, I've only got a few minutes.
Yes, I'm sure you're very busy, so I'll be brief. We specialise in providing security not just for buildings and properties, but also for employees so that they can do their jobs in the safest possible conditions and work with confidence.
So why do you think we need your services?
I don't know at the moment, Mr. Slade, but with your permission, I'd like to ask you a few very quick questions to see if there's anything we can do which your company could benefit from. Do you mind? It won't take long.
Okay, go ahead, but make it quick.
Thank you very much. First, can you tell me, have any of your staff ever been attacked by members of the public or by clients of your company?
Well, that's rather a sensitive question, so I'll only answer very generally. From time to time, we've had members of staff who've been shouted at, or on 1 or 2 occasions physically threatened.
And where have those incidents happened? In the office, or when, for example, they're showing a client a property?
From time to time on the telephone, though our staff are trained to deal with that. On odd occasions here on our premises, and several times, as you say, when visiting properties.
And these members of staff, would I be right in thinking, when they visit properties, are generally working on their own?
Generally speaking, yes.
Can you tell me what protection you offer them when they're working alone outside the office?
Well, we have an arrangement with a large mobile phone company. If one of our staff members presses a number on their phone, a call comes straight through to us. We then ring the person concerned, you see. If they're in a dangerous situation, they can press the number without anyone realizing. If necessary, after that we call the police.
I see. And one last question. Do you find this work satisfactorily? Is there anything you would like to see improved?
Frankly, it's not too satisfactory because sometimes there's nobody in the office. And there was one occasion quite recently when the worker in question felt threatened. She wasn't actually physically attacked, but she didn't feel it was safe to answer her mobile, and we were unable to locate her exactly.
So you'd like to be able to offer your workers round-the-clock protection and be able to locate them automatically if an incident occurs?
That would be ideal.
Well, Mr. Slade, that's exactly the sort of service we'd be able to offer you, and probably at a price that you would find very competitive with your present service. Would you be interested in hearing about what we have to offer?
Yes, I think so, quite probably.
Well, that's great. Perhaps we could set up a meeting and I could show you exactly what we can do.
Okay.
Would sometime this week suit you?
Let me have a look in my diary. I could do Friday afternoon at about 4 p.m.
Friday at 4. That's fine by me. I'll come to your offices, shall I?
Yes, I'll meet you at the reception desk.
OK, fine. I'll look forward to meeting you then. And thank you very much for your time, Mr. Slade.
You're welcome. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Unit 12. Listening. Page 61.
So, come in and take a seat.
Thanks. And thanks for finding the time to see me.
Not at all. Sorry it's a bit late on a Friday afternoon.
No, that's fine. I'm used to working all hours.
Right. Now, tell me about your company's staff protection service. What does it consist of?
OK. Now, as I understood from our phone conversation, You already have a service with a mobile phone operator. They alert you when a member of your staff presses a button to signal that they've got a problem.
That's right. But the service has its limitations, as I mentioned to you on the phone.
Right. So what we do is provide a more complete service. When a member of staff feels threatened or in danger, they press a button and alert us. Our service operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which means first that your staff know that they'll always get a response. Second, that the response will always be immediate. And third, that the people dealing with the call, that's us, are specially trained to deal with these types of situations.
Okay, so far. But what do you do when you get an emergency call?
Well, it's not exactly an emergency call. The employee doesn't have to call us. All he or she has to do is press a button and that alerts us. We then call the employee, and if they answer, we ask them the nature of the problem and take it from there.
Take it from there?
Well, clearly in some situations the worker may just want to let someone know that the client is acting strangely, but they don't feel in any immediate danger. In this case, they have a code word, and we can give them advice, tell them how they should proceed and perhaps just generally to calm them down so that they don't feel quite so threatened. It really helps in these situations if they know there's someone there if they need them. We can also alert your office of the potential problem, and if the situation warrants it, we can call the police.
How will the police know where to go?
Because your staff will be supplied with equipment which is basically a slightly adapted mobile phone, but which also contains a satellite tracking system, so we know where they are to within a few metres. Of course, we make sure that the employees know this and sign an acceptance form when they get the equipment. You don't want to be accused of spying on them when they're not working.
No, of course not. That's a good point. But I'll tell you why I'm interested. In the last year or so, we've had a couple of incidents involving staff. Of course, they're given some training in how to handle difficult customers or tenants, but about 3 months ago, a member of staff was visiting one of the properties we manage, and he was actually physically attacked by the tenant of the property. You may have read about it in the local press. He had no opportunity to make a phone call, let alone have a phone conversation. Fortunately, he wasn't badly hurt, but he was badly shaken and was off work for a month after that. It's that sort of situation that we want to avoid.
Precisely. And in that case, he'd just have pressed the button and not responded to our phone call. Often just the fact that the phone rings is enough to make a potential attacker desist. We'd then have alerted your office, or if there was no one in the office, we'd call a contact number you'd have supplied us with, and at the same time, we'd have phoned the police.
That sounds fine. But the other incident we had was when one of our workers called in saying she was being threatened, and we responded by calling the police. The police, however, took nearly 45 minutes to come to her rescue. Again, fortunately, nothing very serious happened to her, but it could have been very serious.
We actually try to keep track of the police. We direct them to the location. We phone every 5 or 10 minutes to find out what the situation is and if they've resolved it. Our aim is to provide the completest possible protection without actually giving your staff bodyguards. But if the police have been informed, it's the police who have to deal with the situation. You and we have done everything we can.
And the cost of this? What's the bottom line?
Well, that's the interesting part. It really isn't going to hurt. The costs you'll have are for leasing the equipment, a more sophisticated mobile phone. The charge you'll have to pay for that is really not very high, especially when you consider it in the context of the confidence and security it will give your staff. All you have to pay, apart from that, is a fixed monthly charge, about the same as you'd pay if your burglar alarm was connected to us, and nothing else. There are no extra costs and no hidden charges.
Not even when one of our staff presses the emergency button?
Certainly not. The last thing we want is people to be calculating the cost of calling for help. Look, I have a list of our charges here.
And can you tell me the names of other clients you have? Other companies who use this service?
Unit 13. Listening. Page 64.
Good evening and welcome to Business Growth, the weekly program about business and finance. My name is Max Edwards, and tonight we're going to look at that recurring nightmare, the sales forecast, where sales and finance directors bang their heads together, supposedly gaze into a crystal ball, and then pull some figures out of the air. Or perhaps it's not quite like that. We asked 5 company directors to tell us how they do it, and how accurate their forecasts have been in the past. First, Olivia Howe of SPG Holidays. How do you do it?
Well, I'm basically an economist, so sales forecasts are really not my speciality. But I am asked about how general circumstances might affect our sales figures, and I usually give a projection for bank rates and how they'll affect demand. Last year, though, the company actually underestimated its sales forecast quite considerably when the holidays we sell suddenly, rather unexpectedly, caught on, and everyone, it seemed, was wanting to go on one. I mean, we used to think of our holidays as a niche product, and suddenly they seemed to be mainstream.
So you were running to catch up with demand?
Exactly.
Jaime Almendro, you're a director of the up-and-coming Spanish clothing retailers Proximo, which is appearing in every shopping mall in Europe. How do you predict sales?
Oh, in any number of ways, but my particular contribution comes from my involvement with marketing and market research. I and my team track our rivals' activities and likely sales, and on the basis that whatever they can do, we can do better, we work out what they're selling and add on a percentage. Like Olivia, we also fell short of our forecast last year when a Spanish Formula One driver won the championship, and at the same time we talked him into wearing our clothes. That really was a knockout, and we hurriedly had to source extra suppliers.
Fabulous. Gary Summerwell, Managing Director of the bicycle importers Free Wheel. How do you do your sales forecast?
Hard to tell, really. I mean, I've been to business school and learnt all the conventional techniques, like making computer extrapolations based on past sales and such like. But honestly, I think, in the end, I just go on a hunch and, as you so nicely put it, pull a figure out of the air. You know, what I imagine will be the sales for next year. Because however much calculating you do, you're never going to get it quite right. It's always, in my opinion, better to be optimistic and plan for more sales than fewer. Sometimes you have a hiccup though, like the time a year or two ago when someone comparing bikes in a magazine said ours were overpriced for what they were. Completely untrue, of course, but sales took a bit of a nosedive for several months. We survived though. I think good quality and good service always survive if you stick in there and believe in what you're doing.
Thanks, Gary. Sylvie Lemaitre, your company La Chaise is a leading player in the French furniture market. How do you go about making sales predictions?
It's a complex process, as you know, Max, and I really don't agree with Gary about computer extrapolations. I do think they have a place, but my role is more to look at how our promotional activities can affect sales figures and what we can do as a company to increase our sales. So I look at the money we are thinking of spending and what bearing this will have on how much we sell. I really believe that what you spend in that area should have a quantifiable effect on what you sell. You've got to know that your investment is paying off. Of course, there are always the things you can't predict, like the fire that destroyed our factory in Cognac last winter and meant we couldn't complete all our orders on time.
Bad luck, in other words.
Very.
Thank you, Sylvie. Finally, Nesreen Nasser. You're director of one of the Middle East's most important translation and interpretation consultancies. How important are sales forecasts for a company like yours?
Very important. Though I should say that though we make annual forecasts, we do adjust them on a monthly basis, as I expect all the rest of you do. They're important because we have to get our staffing levels right. We have to be training the right number of new personnel. And we have, like everyone else, to keep a tight control on our cash flow. So we do sales forecasts and cash flow forecasts, and my part is to get our agents in the field to tell us what their likely needs are going to be. I then collate this information and pass it on. Even so, over the past few years, Demand has been growing faster than we can train new personnel and retain them. A lot of staff, after a time, tend to go freelance. And this has meant that rather too frequently recently, we've had to turn down lucrative contracts that we'd counted on in our forecasts.
Very frustrating.
Very. And in a labour-intensive industry like ours, not one with an easy solution.
Unit 14. Listening. Page 69.
How do you think the theatre business is different from other businesses?
Well, probably in no way at all. But the theatre business isn't just a business. The business side of it, i.e. something which has to produce a product that people want and which people are prepared to pay for, is exactly the same as any other business. It must be planned, it must be budgeted, it must be marketed, and it must be successful in order to survive. However, the theatre is also an art form, and you can't apply strict business standards to art. You just can't. The theatre has to have, in some way, shape or form, the right to fail and the right to be unpopular.
And when a new production is going to be put on, where does the initial impulse come from?
The commercial producer, for whom money is absolutely paramount because they're not supported by the state in any way, will find a star, somebody maybe with a high film and or television profile, and try and build a production around him or her.
How would you go about putting on a commercial play?
Well, if I had a play in my head that I wanted to direct and it had a cast of more than, say, 10, I'd be pretty foolish to take it to a commercial management because they would just say, I'm sorry, we can't afford it. Unless you have Brad Pitt in it, in which case we'll fill every theatre in the country. We simply can't afford it. You have to be practical about these things. You have to know your audience, you have to know your producer. And most theatre managers spend most of their time trying to second-guess what an audience will like. And more often than not, the things that are huge runaway successes, both artistically and commercially, you couldn't have predicted in a million years.
How would you go about making financial forecasts and budgeting for a new production?
How would I go about making financial forecasts? I suppose if you knew that you had a certain bankable star, then your forecast would be higher than if you were just taking the risk on a new play. If you were performing a brand new play with a good but not necessarily bankable cast, you would limit the number of performances. I think it would seem wise to do maybe 20 or 24 performances of a new play, not try and run it forever, and be very careful about the size of cast, because an awful lot of the budget of a production goes in actors' wages.
Yes, when you've got a budget, say you've got a production that you're going to mount and you're doing the budget, how does it break down?
It breaks down into creative team's fees, i.e. director, designer, lighting designer, sound designer, choreographer maybe, if this is sort of at full stretch, actors' fees, a set budget for building, making and maintaining the set, a costume budget for either hire or making of the costumes, a properties budget, i.e. the things that are on the set, the objects that you will either have to, again, either hire or buy. And some of those will be called running props. That might be things that are consumed, cigarettes that are smoked, food that's eaten, plates that are broken. That has to be budgeted for as well. And then it's the running costs of the building, and that differs from if it's a subsidised repertory house or if it's not, if it's commercial. For instance, many subsidised reps have their own workshops where things are built, so you don't have to budget that over and above. Commercial projects which don't have a fixed building home, you would have to budget for having your set built out and then transported in to wherever you go.
And a budget then has to be reduced. Are there certain things that you would always go to first to cut?
I think you would look very, very, very carefully at how many people you could afford, because to change that at a late stage is fraught with peril, not only from a sort of sensitive and emotional side, but from a legal side. If somebody is sacked without deserving it, simply because you can't afford to hire them, then they would be well within their rights, and I'm sure Equity, the Actors Union, would help them to sue you management for every penny they had. So you get the people right and you stick to it. Scenic elements are the next most expensive thing. You might find that a set has a piece of very expensive technical equipment, for instance a video screen or something like that, which you might decide we just can't afford it, or a revolving stage, we just can't afford the revolve, or for instance many plays are set in rooms with 3 walls, obviously not 4 because you wouldn't be able to see.
So how would you finance a production? A commercial production we're talking about.
A commercial production, I would go to a producer. Assuming that I'm the director, I would go to a producer and say, I've got a marvellous idea. Let's do A Flea in Her Ear by Fado. I've got actors X and Y lined up who are interested in being in it. Can you do it for me? If the producer says, yes, I think we might be able to do this, it is then his or her job to raise the money. They would either put up money of their own, or if they're the big ones and they own theatres, then that makes it a little bit simpler because you'd go into one of their theatres. Or a smaller, more independent producer would go to some rich backers known as angels, and they would say to them, we have this production coming up, do you want to buy a share in it? They might, for instance, sit down and say, okay, we'll send 100 packages out to people who we think might be interested in investing in our production, and they can invest in it at a level of their choice. They can buy units, if you like, in the production, and if you just fancy a flutter, you can buy a couple of units. If this is what you do and you want to take a big financial gamble in order possibly to reap a big financial reward, then you'll buy correspondingly a lot more units.
How long do you think a play has to run before it can break even in the West End?
I think a play that's been carefully budgeted and is not a hugely expensive one to front can probably break even in about 12 weeks.
Can you think of the proportion of London productions that make money versus the ones that don't make money?
No, I don't know the answer to that. I would have thought that the ones that don't make money are massively outweigh the ones that do. However, if you get one that does, it can be a cash cow for years and years.
And also, presumably, if the production company don't make money, they don't get to produce much more because they haven't got the money to put it on.
No, although producers are huge risk takers.
Unit 14. Listening. Page 71.
First tonight we talk to Paul Keane from the National Gallery in London about corporate sponsorship of arts events. Paul, is sponsorship growing or is it going out of fashion?
Definitely not going out of fashion, Jenny. Corporate sponsorship of the arts is up about 50% on 10 years ago.
So it obviously takes quite a whack out of their budget. Why do they do it?
Well, there are lots of advantages to it. It can be great publicity if you get the right event or activity. You can get to people who would normally be impervious to your advertising. You can leave a pretty permanent reminder of your company's existence in a high-class public place. For example, a theatre bar might be named after you, or have the company logo in it. And you can associate yourself with some really high-class art or music or theatre, which does no end of good for your company image. Actually, for big organisations, I'd say that last point is the one which really gets them on board.
We hear about companies sponsoring arts events which actually appeal to quite a narrow audience, such as opera or ballet. Why do they do that?
That's interesting. But you must remember it's not the quantity of the audience, but the quality which counts. These elitist events tend to attract people with money. Not necessarily company directors, though I suppose there are a few of them, but certainly people who are likely to put money into the stock exchange. I mean, you may not sell more product, but you bring your company name to people who invest, and up goes your share price, hopefully. Neat, isn't it?
It sounds clever if it works like that. We've always heard about corporate sponsorship in the United States. Is it something which is catching on more in Europe?
In the last 10 years or so, certainly. Governments used to subsidise the arts much more than they do nowadays, so arts institutions have to get out there and find backers. Though they've really been helped in a lot of countries by bigger tax breaks. You know, what costs the company in real terms just about £200,000 can mean income of up to £1 million for the organisation receiving it.
What sort of activities do companies most like to sponsor?
I'd say that exhibitions in world-class galleries like the Tate are just about the most popular. It depends on what they're exhibiting, though. Music concerts are still pretty popular, although not so much nowadays, because they're fairly one-off. Exhibitions, on the other hand, go on for months and have people strolling around and taking their time and can be very beneficial for corporate image. Wouldn't you like your company to be associated with Matisse or Picasso? Then you read in the papers about Barclays Bank sponsoring the National Theatre, so there are no clear trends.
What gives an arts organisation an advantage in attracting money?
They need to be big and well known. Nowadays, they have full-time fundraisers, perhaps as many as 20 or 30 working for them. And I think that's the crucial point. They're able to put a professionalism into it that smaller organisations find hard to compete with. Although it also helps to be located in somewhere like London, Paris or Berlin. Places out in the provinces are at a disadvantage, unless they're really well known, like the Salzburg Festival or that sort of thing.
Now, what about smaller businesses? How can they benefit from sponsoring the arts?
In a number of ways, actually, and they can do it on quite a modest scale and still reap the benefits. Particularly, their employees feel that they're working to put something back into the local community and that the profits are not just going to the shareholders. It makes them feel more motivated and more closely tied to the company. A lesser point is that people in the local community may also view them differently, and companies may hope that they'll get more favourable treatment from their local politicians. But politicians are a changeable lot, and I wouldn't count on it.
Now, say an organisation, a theatre or an orchestra, was going to approach a company for funds. How should they go about it?
Good question. One thing which is definitely not too effective is to flood people with glossy brochures and videos and the like. Company decision makers see hundreds of them. No, the personal approach is better. One of your executives should go along and give a presentation accompanied by a 2-page executive summary explaining goals, needs, budgets and activities. Something snappy and businesslike.
OK, and one final question. When a company is looking for something to sponsor, what criteria should they use?
In my opinion, you shouldn't look too much at visitor numbers. It may be okay, but it can rebound on you. You know, those exhibitions which attract thousands of people, long queues, many of whom are tourists from overseas and are never going to be your customers anyway. The main objective is that the event is compatible with the way you want people to see your company. What the newspapers say doesn't matter, because they're not going to mention your sponsorship. Basically, the event has got to look right for you, nothing else.
Thank you, Paul Keane. And now, troubles in the fixed-line phone industry. Is it an obsolete technology, or can it adapt to changing times?
Unit 15. Listening. Page 74.
Hello, could I speak to Rajiv Narayan, please?
Speaking.
Hello, Rajiv. It's Astrid Klöff here.
Hello, Astrid. What can I do for you?
It's about this invoice which you still haven't paid, and I was wondering when you were intending to pay it.
Oh, that. Yes, I'm terribly sorry. We're hoping to pay it as soon as we possibly can.
And when do you think that might be, Rajiv? It's beginning to cause us serious problems.
Well, the problem is that 2 major customers haven't paid us for what they owe us, and so we're also having cash flow difficulties.
I see. So that's causing a sort of chain reaction, and we're at the end of it.
Yes, it's very embarrassing for us. We are hoping to pay you.
Yes, but when?
Hopefully by the end of the month, just as soon as we have some cash available. Our customers have promised to pay us by then.
You know, Rajiv, the trouble is it's beginning to cause us problems too.
Oh dear.
Yes, we've had to ask our bank to allow us to extend our overdraft, which is working out pretty expensive.
I'm sorry to hear that. In our case, to tell you the truth, we just can't ask the bank for any more money. We're right up to our credit limit now.
I see. I'm sorry to hear it.
Look, Astrid, I'll keep you informed, and just as soon as the money comes in, I'll let you have what we owe you. Is that all right?
Okay, Rajiv. I suppose it'll have to be. What I'd really like is a firm commitment to pay this month.
I think I can give you that, Astrid.
I'd like that commitment in writing, Rajiv. Can you do that for me?
Sure, I don't see why not. I'll put a registered letter in the post to you today. You should get it tomorrow.
Okay, Rajiv. Today's the 20th. I look forward to receiving your cheque within the next 11 days.
Fine, Astrid. And thanks for calling.
You're welcome. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Unit 15. Listening. Page 75.
Does Giffords have problems with late payers or non-payers? And if so, how do you deal with them?
Well, that has been a theme of recent years, and the need to improve our cash flow is something which we've targeted during the last few years. And we have a team of very friendly people who contact our late payers amongst our clients and politely remind them of the need to pay promptly. So it's very much done on a friendly basis of encouragement to start with. But clearly, if we have a client who is a very late payer and they have no good reason for delaying payment, then other measures have to be taken.
So this is outsourced from Giffords, it's not a department?
No, it's within Gifford, yeah. So they're very much part of our team.
Part of the finance team?
Part of a finance team who'll look to recover late payment. And because we're looking to have future jobs with clients, of course, it's preferably done on a very friendly, amicable basis.
But does it happen often that that companies don't pay, or that they can be a slow payer? I suppose you get to know that.
It's very rare that a company won't actually ever pay. There are some who are slow payers. Of course, some of them may reckon that they've got very legitimate reasons for paying slowly. They may not be satisfied with the work we've done, and they'll hold back payment until they're satisfied that we've done everything that we have to do.
Unit 16. Listening. Page 76.
So, let's initiate today's session by talking about negotiating problems and things we can do to get round them or get over them. Negotiating is a big part of all your jobs, so let's have a quick buzz session where each of you briefly describes a negotiating problem you've had in the past, and then we'll go on to look at how we can deal with these things. How does that sound to you? All right? So, who'd like to start? Vasily?
Sure. This wasn't in my present job, I'll start by saying. I was working in procurement for a processed food manufacturer at the time. You know, a large multinational. And working on a deal for a pretty large consignment of flour. And by that I mean several hundred tons. Of course, I wanted them to knock something off the price. I mean, taking into account the fact that we were buying in bulk. I was expecting to haggle a bit. You know, I'd ask for 6 and settle for 3, reach a compromise. But when I put it to them, their salespeople, they said that they didn't have the authority and would have to ask someone higher up. I mean, that's pretty frustrating when you think you're talking to the right people, and then it turns out you're not.
So pretty irritating. Who's next? Melinda.
Yes. This was before I was promoted, when I was still a fairly inexperienced office manager, and we were talking about installing a new computer network in the office. I should say that we were running a pretty big but temporary operation to meet an order that had come in, so we were in larger temporary offices, and since it was just for a few months, we didn't want to buy the stuff, just hire it. Being relatively junior and fairly new in the job, I didn't have much leverage, bargaining power. Well, when I met their reps, they only wanted to sell us the stuff and didn't seem to take in the fact that we wouldn't be needing it in 6 months' time. And they refused to take me seriously because I was so young.
Ageism in reverse. And you, Glenn?
I work in air conditioning, and we were working on this deal with one of those big hotel chains where they'd buy the stuff and we'd install it. Then they insisted that the maintenance should be thrown in for free, even when we'd already given them quite a hefty discount. I mean, you can't do that. One thing is the price, and another thing is the cost of labour and parts over years and years. Even when I told them what my bottom line was, they just refused to budge. I mean, their buildings manager said, take it or leave it, and that was it. We'd reached a deadlock. So, no deal.
Very disappointing. Carla?
We import clothes from the Far East, and really we have to have them in the stores by the beginning of October to make the winter season. These were a range of coats that we'd had designed and ordered, and we were negotiating all the terms. The real sticking point was that if they were late delivering, we said they'd have to pay, or rather they'd only get 50% of the final price. I think the real problem was that they didn't even know when they'd be able to get the things out, and they were afraid of taking on something they couldn't do.
Frustrating. Finally, you, Naomi.
Well, these people had outlets all over the country, so we were hoping they'd agree to stock and sell our products. You know, they didn't have to do much more than that, except perhaps organise the publicity, which shouldn't have been a problem for them. Everything was going fine, you know. I was talking about the constraints on us caused by our suppliers' prices. It was just a bargaining point, really, because that's one of the enjoyable parts of my job, you know, the horse trading. When suddenly my opposite number interrupted me by saying that it was too soon to be talking about this and that the market was not right yet. I was very put out because we'd already been discussing it for several months. I mean, he could have come out with this information sooner.
Well, OK, thanks all of you. That was very good. Now let's take all of these one at a time and analyse them and see exactly what's happening and what we can do about it.
Unit 16. Listening. Page 78.
So, let's go over what they're asking for again.
Fine, I'll just get it up on the screen and then we can go through it point by point and see what we think.
That's it.
OK, here it is. First, apart from the monthly rent, which we discussed before, they're asking for another half year as an upfront deposit. What do you think of that, Ramon?
It's a bit steep. Supposing we offer them 2 months and settled for 3. Do you think they'd accept that?
It's possible, I suppose. We could try. After all, I don't think there are too many companies who'd be willing to shell out 6 months' rent as a lump sum.
No. Still, let's go through the rest and then we can put together a counter-offer.
Right. The next point, which shouldn't give us too many problems, I imagine, is that we'll have to keep to the same commercial activity unless we obtain the owner's approval in writing.
No problem there. I suppose if we were to start doing something different, they could use it as an excuse to try to up the rent. I mean, we're an insurance company, and as long as we continue to be an insurance company, we won't have anything to worry about. We could perhaps use it as a bargaining point, though. You know, pretend that we might change, and then haggle over it to get an advantage somewhere else.
Possibly. There's one thing here which I'm not too keen on. They want the right to raise the rent every year according to the inflation rate. And I think we'd be better going for a 2-year deal on that.
OK. But provided rents didn't rise by more than that, I'd be quite happy with that clause myself. I don't see it as a big issue, frankly.
True. So perhaps we could let that one pass. Though again, we might use it as a bargaining point.
Quite.
Another point in this document is that we, the leaseholders, must foot the bill for any alterations or repairs we might decide to make. And this is quite serious, as we have to be sure the building is in good condition before signing anything. We'll need a thorough survey, and we can only agree to this provided we're given a fairly long lease. I mean, we don't want to go to the expense of a lot of building work and then be evicted soon afterwards.
Correct. So we should look for some guarantees there.
Sure. And I think they'll be quite amenable on that one, because there aren't that many companies looking to lease round here at the moment. The only thing about it that I don't like is that they want to reserve the right to change the conditions of the lease, i.e. making them renewable, after 5 years.
Personally, I think we should go for 10.
Me too. In fact, I'd only take the lease on condition that we had a 10-year agreement.
Good. Well, we have the basis for a counter-offer then. I think we should be able to negotiate something very much to our advantage. And the landlord should be happy because we're prepared to offer him a pretty generous rent.
True. And he's thrown in something which is quite attractive. It's not here on the document, but his secretary phoned to say that there was also the possibility of us renting staff parking space in the basement as part of the deal.
Well, that's pretty attractive. If we were to get that, it would make life much easier for everyone. Did he mention a price or how many places were available?
He told me there was room for up to 30 cars, which might mean we had some room for customers as well.
Unit 17. Listening. Page 84.
Good evening and welcome to Business Night. Now, stress has been a favourite topic amongst workers and employers for a good number of years, and according to recent figures published by the Health and Safety Executive, it's still on the increase. The government is worried and has issued new guidelines to employers on how to deal with it. Tonight, we have in the studio Mariella Kinski, an occupational psychologist who's just written a book about stress. Mariella, who is most likely to be affected by stress?
Not an easy question to answer, because stress is such a subjective thing, and one person's stress is another person's excitement. Rather flippantly, I might suggest that housewives suffer the most from a fatal combination of boredom, isolation and low status. But there are no figures on this because, of course, housewives don't come into data on work-related stress. The people who statistically come top of the league are routine office workers, which is surprising when you consider that in many ways their working lives are more comfortable than their predecessors' lives ever were. In general, their bosses seem to thrive on it, which perhaps explains in part how they became bosses in the first place. It also shows that it has its positive and negative sides. Positive stress is seen as a challenge which gives you a zest for living and doing more. Negative stress comes, I think, often from a perception one has of lack of control over one's life.
Interesting. What is stress exactly? Can you give me a definition?
Not easily. And that's the major problem doctors have when faced with a patient who says he's too stressed to go to work. I mean, how do you diagnose something you can't measure or examine? In that sense, it's a bit like pain. I mean, if you say you've got it, you've got it.
So what do they do about it?
Well, you can't just tell someone they're not really stressed and that they should pull themselves together and get on with things. Doctors do have a number of things in their armoury, though. They give people time off, they prescribe pills. In extreme cases, they send them to a therapist.
Like you?
Like me.
And are these things effective?
In some cases, not many.
So how is stress affecting productivity, Mariella? Is it a major industrial problem or just something we all like to complain about?
It's certainly something we like to complain about nowadays. In the old days, people had other ways of letting off their stress, I think. They weren't so supervised, so they could get their own back on their employers, you know, by not working too hard. Perhaps even by stealing or damaging things at work, though I like to think that those are extreme cases. And this was part of the sort of them and us battle, which was fought out in the workplace. That's not so easy to do nowadays. I mean, it's socially frowned upon, and people can get found out more easily, especially as most of them spend their day sitting in front of a computer, not operating a machine at the back of a workshop. On the other hand, people change their jobs more frequently than was possible in the past, though it's hard to say what part stress plays in this or whether it's due to other factors. After all, starting anew in a new place must be at least as stressful as staying put. What we can measure and what shows a sharp increase is sick leave due to workplace pressure.
And what's causing it? Is it boredom or surveillance or overwork or what?
Again, there's plenty of debate about this amongst occupational psychologists. We certainly don't spend so much time at work as we did in the past. All the figures will bear me out on that one. While we're at work, the pace has certainly hotted up. They give us perks like laptops and mobiles, and as a result, we're always on call and we end up working very much more intensively than we did in the past. I think it has to be that. I mean, you mentioned that Big Brother bugbear. They can monitor your computer activity. They can record your phone calls and so on. All technically feasible. but it only happens in large companies with the resources to do this. Most companies really don't have the time or the personnel, while reports of workplace stress are pretty much across the board. So the cause has to be what I mentioned before.
Do you think the way our work is organised has changed and that's a stressor?
Well, that's an interesting point. There's no doubt that our parents and grandparents in general lived harder lives. They worked more for less, but their work gave them a social cohesion, which isn't so evident now. They got companionship from work. They were protected by their trade unions and professional associations in ways which disappeared 20 or so years ago. And when they stopped work, they stopped thinking about it and really devoted themselves to their family and free time activities. And I think that last point is the one which has really made the difference.
We often hear the consumer society cited as a reason for stress. What part does it play in the equation?
Clearly we're better off than our parents and grandparents, and this means that we're liberated from a lot of the routine drudgery which they had to put up with in their non-working time. This means we have more time to worry, and not only that, I think we even expect and want to worry about our work. Strange, isn't it, considering that in most ways we're safer and more prosperous than was ever the case in the past.
You say we're expected to worry. What exactly do you mean by that?
Yes, our work has become very central to our identity, who we are as people, and work-related stress has become an acceptable, even a respectable thing to complain about. You can do it, and the fact that it's stressful is almost a sign of how difficult the job is and how hard you have to work, and therefore people will look up to you for doing something despite the difficulties.
So finally, what can employers do to cut down on stress in the workplace?
I don't think you're going to like my answer to this one, but frankly, I think there's almost nothing to be done. It's a fashion and a reflection of our social climate. You know, you can individually get advice from professionals. In my experience, it's hardly ever cost-effective or effective in any sense. Giving people social support by organising them in teams might, you would think, bring a favourable outcome, but it often results in more pressure on individuals prone to stress. What the Health and Safety Executive, a government body, seem to think can improve things is getting people to take part in the change process within their workplaces. The idea is that they have a feeling of more control over their lives. I personally see very little evidence for this being effective. People were less stressed in the past when they had even less control. Unit 18. Listening. Page 88.
And in actual fact, there are more than 1 million people in this country participating in some sort of job-sharing scheme, so it's not all that unusual, really. What are its advantages and disadvantages? Well, for employees, if they have other things they want to do in life, for example, sing in a professional choir or do a university course as a mature student, career continuity is one of the main things in its favour. You don't have to totally give up one thing in order to do something else, and while you're satisfying your other longings, you can carry on working and earning a living. People who need to juggle their jobs and their family responsibilities get an element of flexibility, which lets them carry on working when they might otherwise not be able to. Similarly, people who have had to give up working for one reason or other can, through job sharing, rejoin the workforce in a way which they find practicable, especially if they can't work full-time. There are a number of drawbacks for employees. First, for people who are a bit ambitious, job sharing lessens your chances of climbing the corporate ladder. The way round this is to put in your CV alongside that of your job sharing colleague and go for promotion on a joint basis, and this can work very well if both people in the partnership are performing well. Another drawback is that you're likely to come in for less training, just because the cost of sending 2 people on a course is twice the cost of sending just one. Finally, on this one, you'll probably never be paid overtime, as each of you is counted as a part-time worker and you never get up to the maximum working hours. There are quite a lot of advantages for employers to job sharing. To start with, part-time workers generally work harder than full-time workers because they don't have to pace themselves through an 8-hour day or a 5-day week. As a consequence, job sharers tend to be more productive, and this can reflect very favourably on the overall profitability of a department. Also, job sharing schemes can make the difference between employees going off somewhere else and staying. So staff turnover on many occasions is lower in companies operating these schemes. Another thing, because job sharers have that extra flexibility to look after sick children or parents, they're less likely to take sickness absences than their full-time colleagues. Finally, to wind up, I'd better just point out the difficulties for employers when they want to implement a scheme like this, and it's not necessarily easy to do, even with the best will in the world. Because job sharers sometimes don't see each other, it can mean that job functions suffer. A task started by one person may not be continued by the other, so it takes longer to complete. Also, because working hours are different, bosses may not see the employees on the scheme regularly, and this can lead to communication problems. Finally, there's the training problem mentioned earlier, and the costs involved in training 2 people instead of 1. There is a way round this, which is to get the more experienced partner to train up the less experienced one. However, I think that where employers and employees are willing to make the effort, job sharing can be a very positive experience for everyone involved and well worth giving a try. Thank you.
Unit 18. Listening. Page 89.
In today's edition of The Lowdown, we talk about work and how it's changing. To start with, we invited 5 people from around the world to our studios to talk about their present jobs and their future ambitions. Here are some of the things they said.
Well, my name's Lechzinska, and I'm an industrial electrician working in a large food processing plant in Gdansk in Poland. Basically, I like my job, apart from the smell, but you can't have everything. I get on pretty well with my colleagues, and I think they're pretty good to have placed their confidence in me, being a woman doing what's traditionally a man's job. On the other hand, I'm hardly getting what's the going rate for my job in this part of the world, and unless I get a more competitive wage, I think I'll soon be moving on, because I think with my skills I could make a better living being self-employed. I mean, I can't see myself working for them forever, even though I like the social side of things there.
I'm Ganesh, and I work for the Indian subsidiary of a Swiss multinational as a pay clerk. The job doesn't sound too exciting, and it isn't. I've been in it for a few years now, and while computerization has meant big changes in the way we work, I feel I'm stuck in a rut and stagnating. It's a sort of feeling of once a pay clerk, always a pay clerk. I'm in my early 30s and with not too many commitments. I mean, I can easily make ends meet, so I'm thinking of doing one of those distance learning courses where I can convert to being a proper accountant rather than what I'm doing now.
My name's Francesca Morelli. My parents are Italian, though I was born and brought up in South London. Recently, I've moved to Prague, where I work as a loss adjuster for a big insurance company. I'm on the go all the time and don't get much chance to wind down, not even at weekends, because they give me a mobile phone and I'm expected to be on call. Working hours are reasonable, in fact, but the job is pretty high pressure, and I sometimes worry that in the long run it will affect my health. Well, basically, I enjoy it, but I think I probably need a break from it for a year or so to take stock. Just temporarily, I mean.
My name's Darren Correll, and I do temping for an agency, just filling in for people off sick, or on maternity leave, or when there's a rush on. The place I'm working at the moment is pretty dire, actually. I mean, no one seems to speak to anyone, and when they do, it's only to complain. But in general, I like temping because it suits my lifestyle. I can work when I want to work, and I can concentrate on my career when I'm not. In case you don't recognise me yet, I'm an aspiring actor, waiting for my big break. And this job makes ends meet between the bit parts I'm getting offered at the moment. My dream is to get taken on by the Royal Shakespeare Company, and work for them till I retire in 40 years' time. Because this temping will become a bit of a strain if I carry it on for too long.
So, I'm Irenka, and I'm from Hungary. At present, I'm working as a trainee stockbroker with a big firm in Budapest. We don't stop, and there's lots of excitement because I'm buying and selling millions of euros worth of shares every day. I think my boss supervises my work too much, which annoys me. I know he's worried I'll make a mistake, but I haven't so far. Still, I suppose it's his responsibility if I do. The money's good because we get a cut of the profits, and when I've made enough, I'll probably launch my own firm, but perhaps not a stockbroker's.
Unit 19. Listening. Page 92. Tonight on Business Night we look at productivity. With the advent of information technology, robots and the internet, the drive towards increased productivity has become increasingly intense. I have in the studio 3 production managers, each from different industries. Lee Kar-seng of Radiolux, a manufacturer of household appliances, Ferenc Kovac from Kovac Shoes, and Mike Drewer from the producer of frozen convenience foods Unifreeze. First, I'd like to ask Lee, should production managers always be looking for higher productivity?
It's one of the factors, but really they should be going for efficiency, reliability, quality, satisfying customer requirements, and a whole range of requirements which are central to competing effectively, not just churning out products at the lowest possible price. In my company, in one factory, productivity actually went down quite sharply a year or so ago. Alarm bells started sounding at head office, but when they came for an explanation, there was a perfectly simple answer. The gadgets we were making were more reliable and more complex, with more added features, so they took longer to produce. But they met customer needs better, and while we produced less, we stopped producing things and stockpiling them because we couldn't shift them quickly enough. Our activities as a provider of unwanted goods with excess production capacity were cut short, and everyone was happier. So, no, productivity is one of the factors to watch, but it's not the be-all and end-all of a production manager's life.
In today's highly complex world, how reliable are traditional ways of measuring productivity?
Quite unreliable. You know, you're measuring output per worker, but in an industry like ours, where we're constantly innovating, large numbers of man-hours are swallowed up in developing and modifying the product, designing, preparing and testing the production process for the new product, modifying the assembly line, and so on. It's a very complicated business, which in some cases can take months or years, and in other cases be comparatively quick. You have also to take into account the parts you'll need to buy in, get these designed and budgeted for and ordered. So, with so many people involved in the process, productivity measures are bound to suffer.
So what would you rate as the best measure?
Well, we've got to look at profitability and what we can bring to a product to make it worth buying at a price which is going to earn us revenue, I suppose. Though this may involve a loss of productivity and an increase in the time it takes per shop floor worker to produce each product. Traditional production managers used to be very much product-led in their attitude to how the company should be run. But we've moved on from there and become more centered on bringing the product to the end user when and where they want it. And measures of how successfully and consistently you can do that are what I would rate most highly. That's, after all, what's going to keep you in business and add value to your company.
Ferenc, what's your view on this?
I'm also pretty skeptical about productivity measures. Trouble is, they tend to measure what's happened rather than what's happening, and it takes up a whole load of your time and leads to nothing useful, even though you have to be highly trained to understand them. You could probably make the same or better decisions without them. On the other hand, I'm a big fan of automation. It's taken over a lot of the more unpleasant manufacturing jobs and made us less reliant on the vagaries of the labor market. It has its downside, of course, like anything else. You know, technical glitches, need to hire more expensive technical operators, that sort of thing. Which all mean that very often you're not saving on production costs at all. You're just streamlining the process.
Mike Drewer.
Can I just come in here to say that I think there's a serious hazard involved in industry's collective fascination, as it seems to me, with productivity. Productivity increases are usually at the expense of jobs, as companies replace workers with obedient technological marvels. What happens, though, to all those depressed, redundant workers, out of a job and no money to spend? Unlikely to find another job because companies prefer machines or outsourcing, so they stop spending because they've got nothing to spend, and hey presto, we've lost our customer base.
But isn't that being a little alarmist?
I don't think so. But to move on to another point, a lot of our stuff is now not made by us at all. We give that job to modern specialist producers and then buy it in according to demand. It allows us to switch products, innovate relatively cheaply, since we don't have to retool and concentrate on marketing the product, an activity where productivity measures are largely irrelevant.
Ferenc Kovac, do you think productivity has a ceiling, or will it continue to grow?
It'll grow, and in Europe it's got to grow. I don't know if there's some great new thing on the horizon, like the internet has been in the last 10 years. And outsourcing will undoubtedly erode our manufacturing base, but I'm quite sure that sooner or later employment regulations in Europe will have to change to make it easier to hire and fire workers, reduce their holiday time, as has happened in the United States. Otherwise, we just won't be able to compete. And productivity, you know, is really about making the product in the cheapest and most efficient way and increasing profit margins while giving customers the best value for money possible.
Gentlemen, thank you. And now to France, where the French Prime Minister appeared on television last week to announce a shake-up in their telecommunications industry. Unit 20. Listening. Page 95.
Hi, Wendy. Have you got a few minutes?
Sure, Pete. You got my email then?
Yeah, and I'd just like to clarify a few things before my meeting with management next week. What exactly is it you want? It wasn't terribly clear from your email.
Sorry, I wrote it in a bit of a rush. My point is that we're all working round the clock here to make this company a success, and management don't give any sort of acknowledgement of our hard work. I mean, for what we do, I think we should all be moved up a point on the pay scale. I mean, if it weren't for us, this company would fold overnight, wouldn't it?
I agree with you, and I'll put it to them. But I don't think they'll jump at that one. Thanks anyway, Wendy. Dimitri, I was looking at your comment before the meeting we've got with management next week. Could you talk me through it, please?
Sure, Pete. You know the rumours about plans to open offices in other parts of the country? Well, I know they're only rumours, but before they become reality, I just want to say that I don't want to be relocated to one of those against my will. I mean, I've got my home and family life here. Now, had the bosses spoken to us about this possibility, I'd have told them what I thought. But no doubt it never occurred to them because they never ask us. And we're left to get hot under the collar and channel our complaints through you. It's them who should be asking us our opinions, not you.
Thanks, Dimitri. So, next week I must go into the meeting and demand a complete change in management style. They'll love that. But, you're right, of course. Hi, Naline.
Hi, Pete. Here for one of your chats by the water dispenser?
Well, it seems a convenient moment. I've got this meeting with management next week. What was your email all about?
Something which a lot of us think is a pretty big issue around here. We've got all this newly installed electrical and electronic equipment in the building, and no one seems to have much idea what it's for. But my question is, what would we do in the event of a fire? And, by the way, I think there's quite a good chance of one, the way this place is wired up. They could at least show us what to do, give some time to basic safety procedures and how to get out of this fire trap, don't you think?
You're right there. I was going to bring that up anyway, but thanks all the same. I'll let you know what they say. Hi, Claudio. Is this a good moment?
Good as any. What brings you to this remote workstation on the 7th floor? Pete, isn't it?
That's right, your staff rep.
Now, I know why you're here. It's that email I sent you a week or so ago, isn't it?
That's right, because we've got the meeting with management next week, so could you fill me in a bit?
Yes, I'll tell you. What I like to do is get my desk clear, know what I mean? And as a result, they keep putting more on my plate. It's not as if I'm averse to a bit of hard work, but I do feel that I get picked on just because I'm a fast worker. I mean, I'd be happy to do all this, provided other people were being asked to do the same amount. But the managers give the hard workers like myself extra stuff to do, and they never say a word. I suppose they think that if they were to say something, then they'd have to put their money where their mouth is and give us a bonus. But as long as I'm not passed over when the next round of promotion comes along next year, I'll be happy. You got that clear?
Thanks, Claudio. Pretty clear. It's not me you should be angry with, you know. Toya, you got a mo?
Hi, Pete. Long time no see. You've been on holiday then?
Not exactly. I've been completely caught up in a new project. Now, I want to consult you about the meeting with the bosses next week following your email.
Oh, right. Well, yes, it's not such a big deal, really, Pete. I just get a bit fed up with having the bosses breathing down my neck all day, and that goes for all of us around here. We wouldn't mind it if they just let us get on with things instead of continually checking what we're doing. I mean, I've been here a few years now, and given the circumstances, I think that they should know that my work is consistently up to scratch, don't you?
Toya, you're not the first person I've consulted who is looking for a change in management style. Still, I'll find a way of suggesting some changes, I suppose.
Unit 20, Grammar Workshop, page 96. 1.
Honestly, they could have given us more notice instead of springing this on us almost at the last moment. Really, those managers seem to live in their own little world and have very little idea of communication. I mean, in my case, had I known, I wouldn't have bought a new house here just 6 months ago.
2.
For me personally, it would be a big upheaval. I mean, I've got my kids in local schools and so on. On the other hand, I guess several people in my department would be interested in relocating, if the company were to offer the right package. It would have to be pretty generous, though.
3.
This is the 6th job I've had in 5 years, and I've really had it up to here with these short-term contracts. I'd jump at the chance to move, providing I was offered some sort of permanent contract, but I guess it's just as likely that they'll lay me off instead.
4.
Well, you know, travel saves quite a small, limited place for someone who's interested in building a career. And I'd regard this as a great opportunity to go to a big city with more scope if it weren't for the fact that I have all my friends and family in this area.
5.
Actually, I'm originally from Liverpool, as you know, so for me the thing isn't as awful as some people seem to be trying to make out. I'll happily move back to Liverpool as long as I'm given a section supervisor's job as an incentive. You see, I want to get on, and I'm not prepared to move just for the sake of it.
6. My line manager told me that they had their eye on me to move to Glasgow and that I'd get a pretty decent promotion if I agreed to go. I'm not sure I like the way things are being handled with people being taken on one side like this, but anyway, apart from promotion, I've told him I'll only move to Glasgow on condition that they give me a generous resettlement package as well, because I'm not prepared to end up out of pocket as a result of all this. I'd have to sell my house as well, you see. 7.
I'm quite a lowly employee in the hierarchy of travel safe insurance, and frankly, I'm not the principal breadwinner in my household. That's my wife, who's running her own business here in the town. I mean, if it weren't for my wife's job, I'd consider moving as a possibility, but as it is, I can't expect her to close down her company and follow me. That would be totally unreasonable.
8.
The trouble is, most of it's still just rumours, you know. For instance, one rumour that's been going the rounds is that they're going to close departments here completely and open them again in places like Plymouth. I don't honestly know how much truth there is in the rumour, but I must say that in the event of my entire department being relocated, I'll move with them to stay with the team. That's if they all agree to go, of course. Which is unlikely, I guess.
Unit 20. Listening. Page 97.
So, Peter, I called you in to just let you know in advance what our plans are for reformulating the company.
OK, Frank, go ahead. I'll just take notes and listen at this stage.
Fine. First, I'd like to start by saying that this reformulation is an expansion of the company and an expansion of our operations. Our total projected number of staff is set to rise from 450 to 600, although a certain amount of decentralisation will take place as we open offices in different cities. And so there will be a certain amount of cutting back here at our head office in Norwich, where we plan to make cuts of 20%. That is 90 out of our 450 staff. However, that said, I'd like to stress that nobody will be out of a job unwillingly. We'd like a maximum of 60 employees to go to our new centres in Glasgow, Liverpool and Plymouth, and we'll give them financial incentives to do so. To start with, anyone who transfers will get a 5% salary increase straight away, independently of whatever post they transfer to. Also, we know that there are a lot of costs involved in moving to another part of the country, buying and selling houses and so on, so we're prepared to foot the bill by giving a one-off payment of £12,000 to anyone who goes to make sure that they're not out of pocket. Finally, to cover the time involved in uprooting themselves, all these people will get 2 extra weeks paid leave when they transfer. We are, as you see, keen to get experienced and trustworthy staff from our head office into our new operations. The other aspect of our reformulation is for those who don't want to or can't move. And here we're offering totally voluntary redundancies for people who want the opportunity for a career change or a career break. What I mean is, to arrive at the correct number of posts, we'll pay people to leave to the tune of 1 month's gross salary on top of their legal entitlement. In other words, if they were to be made redundant for other reasons, they'd get whatever the law states, but we'll give them a month extra on top of that. And to help them find a new job, if they wish to, we'll provide an outplacement service entirely free of charge so that they can do so. I do want to emphasise most strongly that we want to make these changes with a maximum of goodwill and a minimum of friction. Now, Peter, what's your reaction? Are there any questions you'd like to ask?
Unit 21. Listening. Page 102.
This week is Fair Trade Week, and tonight I have in the studio Professor Bernard Hill from the University of the South Bank, an expert in fair trade. Professor Hill, how does fair trade benefit third world producers?
Producers are paid more for their produce, often cutting out the middlemen who may take an enormous cut, and selling directly to ethically run businesses in richer countries. This is what, for example, has happened in the Maraba region of Rwanda, where, as a consequence, farmers can devote part of their land to growing a variety of crops to feed their families, and another part of their land to a cash crop against which they can raise loans and develop their business, buy equipment and send their children to school. It can, and in the case of Maraba has, transformed the region.
Fair trade has been taking off in this country. Growth in sales, according to many reports, has been in the region of 40 or 50% over several years now. How have the big supermarkets reacted to it?
Supermarkets have a reputation for driving down prices from their providers, and they do this with a view to maximising profits and making the products they sell cheaper in turn. On the other hand, they all have to look good to their customers. Customer loyalty is something no supermarket can count on once they start getting a bad reputation. And in view of this, their mission statements and other literature usually pay lip service to ethical trading and ethical treatment of their suppliers. Still, the main reason given me by someone speaking on behalf of one of our best-known chains was that it's what people want. Just the same as a few years ago they started looking for organic food. And that, rather than publicity seeking, is why they carry these products on their shelves.
And how do you account for the success of the fair trade movement in this country? Programs such as this one, perhaps?
Oh, these undoubtedly help, but they're comparatively few and far between. And frankly, I think the media have been a little slow on picking up on this story. Similarly, the fair trade movement has been loath to spend money on spreading the word and more interested in spending the money they have on developing their fair trade activities. Really, this is one of those things which people have just told each other about. The idea has got round, and it's been helped by having fair trade shops in the high streets and shopping centres.
So is fair trade something which will continue to grow and eventually become a touchstone of the world trading system?
I'd like to think so. But there are many hurdles in its way. Eventually, trade tariffs and subsidies to rich world farmers will disappear, I think. I mean, they've got to, though that'll take time. What may prove a greater difficulty is that fair trade, almost by definition, means paying more than would be the case if the market was just allowed to find its own level. And it'll only bear these artificial levels. I mean, consumers will only accept this in the long run if they feel they're getting value for money in terms of quality. So long term, it's a complicated question. On the other hand, also in the long term, it's in the interests of all of us that this movement is successful. The current differences between rich and poor countries can't be maintained indefinitely. It's not reasonable to continue to pour aid into poorer regions forever. This movement helps people to stand on their own 2 feet and become self-supporting. Quite apart from that, many people in rich countries like the idea of paying a fair price. It makes them feel good. They feel they're cooperating and not exploiting. People become interested in the places their coffee and other products come from, and they become interested to know about the lives of these producers. It's all part of a developing educational process.
Bernard Hill, thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Unit 22. Listening. Page 105.
Can you tell me about how your company breaks into new markets?
Going into new markets, our company tends to acquire businesses. If you look, for example, to the electronic market, a very big market, or the construction industry across Europe, it's an area in which we really don't have a customer base, a supply base. So what we use primarily is acquisition to acquire people and a company with experience in that sector.
OK. Do you ever choose to have distributors instead, or form joint ventures with other organisations?
We are a distributor. We wouldn't generally take on a joint venture, as it would be difficult to see what a joint venture partner would add to us. If we were taking over a distributor, that would be our area of expertise. We are primarily, as I say, distributors. However, we don't do manufacturing. The products we distribute, we primarily source from a supplier or the original manufacturer.
How does Wolseley identify the markets it would like to expand into?
When you look at any market, you're looking at size and growth potential. So when we look across countries or we look to a new product range we can get into, we're looking for something where there's a big market and which is also a growing market, so we can, in entering into that market, we can see lots of potential for further growth of the business.
So once you've decided on a country, how do you identify a company in that target market which is suitable?
What we acquire is expertise in the management group. So what you'll be looking for is a business that we believe is well run. You can assess that by how good their outlets are, their size, their growth rate within that market, through contact with the management and through the finances of the business. Is there healthy financial performance and is it growing?
So why would an overseas company want to be acquired by Wolseley?
The owners of an overseas company might want to sell because it allows them to realise cash. Management would potentially want to join Wolseley because being owned by a business that is in the same trade allows them to benefit from, for example, lower purchasing prices, from the experience and expertise that Wolseley has in other markets, to help them grow and develop in their own markets in a way that they potentially couldn't do on their own.
Unit 22. Listening. Page 107.
And how do you supervise the companies once you've acquired them?
When you acquire a business, the first thing you need to do is share with them your view of the business plan you formed in advance that, as likely as not, you'll have discussed to some extent with them. You then set out the requirements of that, and then the supervision is done through regular contact that can be quarterly, semi-annually, where you'd meet with them face-to-face and discuss the objectives and how they're performing against those objectives. And then you have routine management reporting that comes in every month, which reports on the financial performance, and that allows the business to report on the day-to-day running of the operations.
And how do you go about incorporating these companies into the Wolseley culture?
The important thing is about contact with senior management. Our senior management at a European level need to have contact with them. That's how you get alignment at a management level. There are then events and processes that they'll get tied into. As I said, they'll tie into 6 monthly reviews, they'll meet with group management, they'll get tied into annual conferences that we hold, where management groups from across Europe come together. And slowly, over time, they come to see the way Wolseley works and the people within it.
So that's how you create an international culture then, for your management, is it?
Yes. The international management culture comes, really, down from the senior management. There are also processes ongoing within the business to develop our international management and the culture. We're currently in the second year of a European graduate programme, where we take recently graduated individuals of high calibre and get them working within our business, trained and developed, to enable them to grow and work across our European network. We also recruit at senior and mid-management level to bring different expertise and different management potential. We're looking to then move certain people across Wolseley Europe at mid-management level.
OK. And when you expand into a new market, what sort of activities does Wolseley undertake to build up its brand and make itself known to customers in the new market?
There's the major form of expansion that we tend to take a business we've acquired and look to develop it through its own branch network. What we've tended to do is to retain the local brand. Wolseley believes in the power of the local brand, the individual business that we've acquired. So we'd retain that local brand that's operated by in that market and then look to grow their branches. As we open new branches, we do leafleting and other sorts of marketing campaigns to increase awareness and develop a customer demand prior to opening.
So do you think that it's an option for any company to say, no, we don't want to grow, become international, we're happy as we are?
For other companies, that may be the case. It won't be the case for Wolseley, though.
So it is possible, then?
I could imagine a business that would want to stay entirely local. If we're a service business, I know many retailers are actually, have entirely focused on national boundaries only and haven't sought to go international.
And they could survive like that?
I think in the longer term they'll find it more difficult. Generally, those that have gone further and developed further are bigger. Therefore, they've achieved economies of scale. The reason why one of the major factors in international development is to achieve greater economies of scale through, for example, in our business, purchasing greater volume of products, which would then achieve lower costs.
Mm-hmm. What do you think it is that makes Wolseley products so successful?
Wolseley is a service business. It's about the service that's provided to the professional contractor who visits our branches. What makes the service so successful is the experience and the service provided by the people in those branches, the availability of product, the service that's provided to deliver any products that aren't available the next day, and also other services, for example, providing credit. So we primarily focus on service as opposed to price.
Unit 23. Listening. Page 108.
Hello, Marion. Sorry to miss you this morning, but I had to rush, as you know. So I thought I'd better just give you these instructions before I go, as I'd like to get this moving as soon as possible. You remember we were working on a list of contacts last Friday? Could you please draft the same basic letter to all of them? And then perhaps we'll be able to work out an itinerary when I get back from Shanghai. Write to them by name where possible. I know for some we only have the name of the company. And use a formal style. You're better than me at that, so it's better if you do the letter. And you can email your draft to me later today if you want, and I'll send you any suggestions when I get to my hotel. I've got a few notes of what you should include in the letter. Give them details of our new product, the mirror I mean, and also put in some sales figures from 2 or 3 years ago till now, as those should impress them a bit. I don't think you have to go into too much detail there, just the basics really. Then tell them why we want to expand into Asia. I mean, we've increased our production capacity and, we're now looking for other markets. Something fairly vague like that, but it sounds impressive. Also, you could put in something about our future plans, marketing other products that we have in the pipeline, that sort of thing. Then you could also tell them that we may need someone to distribute our products in their country, or even perhaps a joint venture partner. I know that's not true in all cases, because it will really depend on the country and the type of operation they're running, but it could get some people interested, so that at least we can talk to them. You'd better also say that I'm hoping to go on an Asian tour in the next month or so we'll need expressions of interest from people pretty quickly, and then we'll take things from there. I think that's all for now, Marion. Don't send the letters straight away, because we might just think about asking someone, perhaps an agency, to provide a translation of the letter into some other European languages. Not sure which languages at the moment. Perhaps you've got some ideas on that one, or you could look for an agency on the web. Oh, that's my flight being called, so I better run. See you at the beginning of next week. Bye.
Unit 23. Listening. Page 110. 1.
The initial investment is going to be pretty heavy because we'll be opening and equipping a whole chain of outlets, so that'll eat into profits in the first year or so. Still, we should be able to lure some pretty good local people, especially if we offer competitive salaries. And when we've got the whole operation going, we'll have taken one step further in satisfying the company's ambition of becoming a global presence. And once the operation really gets off the ground, there'll be plenty of profits for us there.
2.
Well, when there's an opening, you can't just pass it by. And with the things we have in the pipeline just now, we just have to be in the North American market. I mean, with the spending power they have there. Of course, we'll have to present things a bit differently to satisfy their rather different tastes. And we've got a design consultant working on the boxes right now. I'll show you one as soon as he sends me a sample.
3.
The competition in our main markets is just getting fiercer and fiercer, so I reckon that unless we move into other areas and spread our risks, so to speak, we'll find ourselves in real danger. Even so, any new market we move into will also be pretty tough, so we'll have to run some very streamlined operations when we do so. Otherwise, we'll never undercut the local players.
4.
People sometimes say that business is the same the world over, but frankly that's not my experience. And it takes managers in the companies we take over some time to cotton on to our working methods. I expect that'll be the case this time too. Often one of the most immediate problems is language. On the other hand, the effort will be worth it because the enlarged distribution chains will allow us to cut costs and sell our products considerably more cheaply than our local competitors.
5.
Quite frankly, I reckon they're asking for it. They've really pushed us into it with the price war they've been waging, so it seems the most logical move is to take over one of their competitors as close to home for them as possible and try and rob market share from them there. And we've got an agency working on the publicity already, because when we're selling our products there, we'll have to take account of the local culture. Otherwise, all we'll succeed in doing is alienating a new market, and that would be a real flop.
Unit 24. Listening. Page 112.
Good morning. My name's Fedor Brodsky, And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Marketing Director for our Consumer Products Division. I'm going to talk to you briefly about how to protect your brand's reputation, a question which should interest all of you in this company. By way of introduction, I should say that good reputations, both for brands and for people, don't come by accident, but from good marketing activities, including particularly building up consistently high quality, excellent packaging, shrewd pricing, and, of course, effective promotional activities over a period of time. Remember, though, that however good a brand reputation is, it can be ruined overnight by critical media coverage, and companies have to do all in their power to avoid that. I think there are 3 main points in defending one's brand. First, we have to make sure that we always satisfy customer expectations. Despite pressures from shareholders, the customer comes first in any business, and with good ongoing market research, we should always be aware of what our customers want from us. Second, we should never make sacrifices in quality. In particular, although your finance department may want to implement cost-cutting exercises, brand quality should never be compromised. Once it gets into the media that, for example, you're putting cheaper ingredients into your pies, people will just stop buying them, even though you spend millions on advertising. My third point concerns protecting the general image of the company, because damage to company image will damage the brand. This is the area of corporate ethics. We know so many famous examples of companies polluting the environment. Oil companies immediately spring to mind. Though damage of this kind is often unintentional or accidental, or, another instance, companies passing part of their operations to subcontractors who then exploit their workers or don't pay attention to safety procedures. In conclusion, the company has to be marketing-led. In other words, the company puts the customer and the customer's needs at the center of all their strategies. This is really one of the golden rules of corporate culture, that whatever you do in whatever area of corporate activity, you should first consider whether this could affect the health of the brand, which must always be your prime objective. Now, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Unit 24. Listening. Page 115.
So, following on from Fedor Brodsky's talk earlier today, I'm also going to talk about risk, but in more general terms. My first point is about risk in general. Many people have the perception that the world is a riskier place nowadays to do business. I'm not so sure that's entirely true. We hear much more about disasters and the like from the media, and this leads to scares, which in turn can affect consumer confidence and share prices. Then again, we keep hearing about global warming and how this is creating even more natural disasters. But these tend to affect business only in exceptional cases. What's true, though, is that business is far more international than ever before. And this means that something that happens in one part of the world can have unforeseen consequences somewhere quite different. 100 years ago, a disaster in Europe would almost certainly not have affected businesses in Japan or Argentina the way it might in today's world of global supply chains and global sourcing. The second thing I'd like to say is that in some ways, people in business run fewer risks. They can take out insurance against many things, and insurance companies make a living from calculating what the probability of a risk is going to be. Business people set up limited liability companies, where they are not responsible for all the company's debts if it fails financially. And government regulations linked with technological breakthroughs have made the world and the workplace safer places to live and work in. There are a number of problems connected with handling risk. While investors' willingness to accept risks varies according to their level of confidence at any one time, this is something which has always been part of the economic cycle. The principal problem is that managers find it hard to assess the real degree of risk that they face in their activities, and some risks seem far greater than they actually are. And so they waste resources preventing something which is unlikely to happen, while they're taken by surprise by something quite unexpected. We see the same with politicians too. Nowadays, of course, computer projections can predict the probabilities of all sorts of untoward events occurring, and these are the basis of how the insurance industry works. While there'll always be things computers can't predict, from rail strikes to storms, if used with confidence, they can be a useful tool. Having said that, managers feel very often that they're paid to assess risks and take appropriate action, and they feel a certain loss of control if they put all their faith in the machine. Finally, I'd like to say that business is about taking risk. You have to take risks to make money. And it's this element of risk and gambling which attracts many people to become entrepreneurs. Risk is part of life, and our job as business people is to accept it and handle it responsibly. Thank you.
Exam skills. Listening. Part 4.
I have in the studio this evening Jeremy Pollock, lecturer in psychology from the University of Leeds, who has made a study into the psychological factors which influence poor decision-making in business. Jeremy, are business people such poor decision-makers?
Not all of them, but a lot of them could improve. And one of the reasons is that while they invest a lot of money in fancy computer equipment to help them make decisions, a lot of them don't like what their computers tell them, and so they rely on their intuition instead.
And how does intuition lead to bad decisions?
In a number of ways. The first one is over-optimism. When people are optimistic, this reflects heightened morale, and as a result, people often do better quality work and produce better outcomes. Obviously a good thing, and footballers are a great example of this. That's not a problem. The problem is over-optimism. And in business, it may lead managers to put too much effort into something which is not going to produce such good results as they expect. They waste resources, and the business in general would benefit from a more modest approach. More to the point, though, is that managers start thinking that everything they are doing will go well, and they tend to forget that they have rivals out there who might be even better than them. That's when things really start to go wrong.
As a matter of anecdote, which nationality do you think is the most over-optimistic?
I guess the Americans. They think their houses are always going to appreciate in value, they never expect to lose money on shares, and most tellingly, in a recent survey, it was discovered that 40% of Americans thought that eventually they would end up in the top 1% of earners. I mean, how unrealistic can you get?
What other psychological influences are there on decision-making?
The next one I'd like to mention is what's called the anchor effect.
What's that?
Well, in negotiation, this is where the first price mentioned, the opening position, becomes the point of reference around which all discussions seem to revolve. Negotiations become distorted because negotiators should be looking at real values so that they reach realistic agreement, rather than one which is based on an outrageous opening bid.
Can you give an example?
Sure. You're interested in buying a house whose market value is really £200,000, but the sellers are asking £1 million. The chances are your discussions, if you have any, will centre around the million figure, not the 200,000 figure. It's clear if you reach a deal that you're going to lose out.
Many people find it hard to make decisions when there is a wealth of information, don't they?
Maybe, but you know, for business managers, actually making decisions is a central part of what their job consists of, so that making decisions as such is not generally the problem. And as long as you can differentiate useful from useless information, having lots of information is a bonus. The problem really arises when managers spend too much time analysing the information for each decision. I mean, some of the decisions are quite trivial. Where to place the photocopier, when to have the Christmas party. This distracts them from analysing information for big decisions, like that looming merger, for example.
I know managers who, once they've made a decision, find it very difficult to admit that the decision was wrong. Is this something which came into your study?
Very much so. This is the stubbornness factor. Pharmaceutical companies who find it hard to admit that the product they decided to develop has no future. So they continue to pour money into researching and developing a no-hoper. Another more typical example is the manager who recruits a new member of staff who turns out to be a dud, just no good at the job. What do? Well, it's hard to believe on a theoretical basis, although we all see it every day. They stick with them. They don't give them the boot and admit their mistake, and they don't send them off to some other part of the company as an advertisement for their bad judgment. They just continue to live with them. Amazing, isn't it?
Yes, but it does sound very familiar. Are there any other psychological factors that affect decision-making?
Just one more, called home bias. This is where people tend to put money into things in their region or in their country, rather than looking further afield. I'm talking about stock market investments and also business investments. Reasonable, you may say. After all, you probably understand those things closer to home better. But you can also get your fingers burnt, and especially if you're a serious investor, investing in a variety of markets and properties is a much safer and more reasonable decision.
Jeremy Pollock, thank you.
My pleasure.
Exam practice. Listening paper. Part 4.
Section 1. Questions 33 to 38. You will hear a discussion between Brian, the managing director of a company, and Judy, its finance director, about premises for a new head office. For questions 33 to 38, circle one letter, A, B, or C, for the correct answer. You will hear the discussion twice. You have 20 seconds to read the questions. Now you will hear the discussion.
Well, Judy, now that we've both had a chance to visit the two buildings, let's compare notes. Do you think either of them would be suitable for our new head office?
I rather like the location of the Carter House, Brian. About 3 kilometres from the town centre, but still within the built-up district and mostly surrounded by housing. It seemed a very pleasant area.
And not far from open country. Yes, I think that was very much in its favour. I could imagine working there. And it's in a reasonable state of repair, isn't it? Though it'll certainly need some work to make it suit our requirements. It's a bit small, but we could build onto it.
Don't you think we could get away with removing some walls to turn 2 or 3 small rooms into one bigger one? Then we can use the existing space more efficiently.
Good idea. Anyway, there's space for an extension if we decide we need it in the future.
We need to consider access, though. We don't want to have problems with that.
It wouldn't be difficult to reach the place from the motorway, which will help with deliveries, as well as staff getting to and from work.
I didn't like the fact that the only way into the car park was near a bend in the road. It might be worth changing that, to approach the car park from the other side of the building.
Yes, that might be better. Did you have time to talk to the agent about the price?
Yes, I did. The asking price is 1.75 million. But the agent hinted that the company that owns it would be prepared to come down to 1.5. My guess is that if we made an offer in the next couple of weeks, we could get it for 1.25 million. I really don't think it's worth more than that.
But do you think they'd accept that?
The agent gave me the impression that the owners want to complete the sale as soon as possible. Apparently, one of their subsidiaries is planning to construct a new shopping centre in the town, and the holding company is trying to raise as much of the finance as they can from their assets to avoid having to borrow it all from the bank and pay interest.
That certainly seems to work in our favour. Well, it's worth taking this further.
What do you think should be the next step? Our board members will want to have a look at the building before we purchase it, won't they?
Yes, but I think time is the most important factor here. I'll get onto the agent straight away and put in an offer. We can always withdraw it if the directors decide against it. If the owners accept it, I'll brief the board next week and fix up a visit for them. Then we'll be in a strong position to go ahead with the purchase.
Good idea.
Now you will hear the discussion again.
Well, Judy, now that we've both had a chance to visit the two buildings, let's compare notes. Do you think either of them would be suitable for our new head office?
I rather like the location of the Carter House, Brian. About 3 kilometres from the town centre, but still within the built-up district and mostly surrounded by housing. It seemed a very pleasant area.
And not far from open country. Yes, I think that was very much in its favour. I could imagine working there. And it's in a reasonable state of repair, isn't it? Though it'll certainly need some work to make it suit our requirements. It's a bit small, but we could build onto it.
Don't you think we could get away with removing some walls to turn 2 or 3 small rooms into one bigger one? Then we can use the existing space more efficiently.
Good idea. Anyway, there's space for an extension if we decide we need it in the future.
We need to consider access, though. We don't want to have problems with that.
It wouldn't be difficult to reach the place from the motorway, which will help with deliveries, as well as staff getting to and from work.
I didn't like the fact that the only way into the car park was near a bend in the road. It might be worth changing that, to approach the car park from the other side of the building.
Yes, that might be better. Did you have time to talk to the agent about the price?
Yes, I did. The asking price is 1.75 million, but the agent hinted that the company that owns it would be prepared to come down to 1.5. My guess is that if we made an offer in the next couple of weeks, we could get it for 1.25 million. I really don't think it's worth more than that.
But do you think they'd accept that?
The agent gave me the impression that the owners want to complete the sale as soon as possible. Apparently, one of their subsidiaries is planning to construct a new shopping centre in the town, and the holding company is trying to raise as much of the finance as they can from their assets, to avoid having to borrow it all from the bank and pay interest.
That certainly seems to work in our favour. Well, it's worth taking this further.
What do you think should be the next step? Our board members will want to have a look at the building before we purchase it, won't they?
Yes, but I think time is the most important factor here. I'll get onto the agent straight away and put in an offer. We can always withdraw it if the directors decide against it. If the owners accept it, I'll brief the board next week and fix up a visit for them. Then we'll be in a strong position to go ahead with the purchase.
Good idea.
Exam practice. Listening paper. Part 4.
Section 2. Questions 39 to 44. You will hear a radio interview with a man called Gary Waters about how advertising agencies can win new business. For questions 39 to 44, circle one letter, A, B or C, for the correct answer. You will hear the interview twice. You have 20 seconds to read the questions. Now you will hear the interview.
With me tonight is advertising executive Gary Waters to talk about planning an advertising campaign. Gary, how does it start?
Say a company wants us to plan a campaign for a new product. It could be in magazines, on TV, whatever. We have regular clients, of course, but a lot of work comes from people who've seen work of ours and like it. Usually, they call us first, and at this stage it's really exploratory to see if you're on the same wavelength. We don't usually get into a discussion of money yet. Next, they send a written brief outlining what they want, and we agree on a date to present our proposal to the company. That presentation's really important because it'll help them decide whether or not to give us the job. So we must have good ideas and present them convincingly.
How do you get ideas for your proposal?
I may do some background research and play with a few ideas, but I make sure I have a preliminary meeting with the client, usually their marketing manager. That's when I pick up the image they have of the product, any problems they might be having, what they're really looking for, and what pressures they're under, say from their competitors. I need to get a feel for the company itself. That's actually more important than the product, and that's when the campaign usually takes shape in my mind.
What do you do next?
I put together a team. That way we get far better ideas than by working separately. Once we've got an idea we're happy with, we work on it till we know exactly how we see the campaign. Then we start planning the presentation we're going to give the client. That's an oral presentation followed up by a written proposal package, but we prefer to do that part of the proposal individually. A lot of agencies write both the presentation and the backup as team efforts, but the danger is that you can end up with a mixture of styles which would make both your work and your agency seem disorganized.
Do you write out the presentation in full?
Some people do, but it's much more effective not to. I plan it carefully and just write down keywords to remind me of the points I want to cover. That way I can talk to the client in a much more natural way than if I'm reading aloud. I can also keep an eye on how they're responding and modify the presentation if I see I'm losing them.
Do you ever get asked difficult questions?
Oh yes. We always practice giving the presentation to colleagues to make sure everything's clear, and the people listening try to anticipate the client's questions by asking as many as they can think of, particularly difficult ones. That way we're hardly ever taken by surprise when we present to the clients.
Finally, Gary, what's the secret of an effective presentation?
Some people like to make it funny, but I think it's important to keep it clear, short and simple. People can't usually concentrate for longer than about 20 minutes, and you can't cover everything in that time anyway, so the detail can go in the written proposal package.
Gary Waters, many thanks.
Now you'll hear the interview again.
With me tonight is advertising executive Gary Waters to talk about planning an advertising campaign. Gary, how does it start?
Say a company wants us to plan a campaign for a new product. It could be in magazines, on TV, whatever. We have regular clients, of course, but a lot of work comes from people who've seen work of ours and like it. Usually, they call us first, and at this stage it's really exploratory to see if you're on the same wavelength. We don't usually get into a discussion of money yet. Next, they send a written brief outlining what they want, and we agree on a date to present our proposal to the company. That presentation's really important because it'll help them decide whether or not to give us the job. So we must have good ideas and present them convincingly.
How do you get ideas for your proposal?
I may do some background research and play with a few ideas, but I make sure I have a preliminary meeting with the client, usually their marketing manager. That's when I pick up the image they have of the product, any problems they might be having, what they're really looking for, and what pressures they're under, say from their competitors. I need to get a feel for the company itself. That's actually more important than the product, and that's when the campaign usually takes shape in my mind.
What do you do next?
I put together a team. That way we get far better ideas than by working separately. Once we've got an idea we're happy with, we work on it till we know exactly how we see the campaign. Then we start planning the presentation we're going to give the client. That's an oral presentation followed up by a written proposal package, but we prefer to do that part of the proposal individually. A lot of agencies write both the presentation and the backup as team efforts, but the danger is that you can end up with a mixture of styles which would make both your work and your agency seem disorganized.
Do you write out the presentation in full?
Some people do, but it's much more effective not to. I plan it carefully and just write down keywords to remind me of the points I want to cover. That way I can talk to the client in a much more natural way than if I'm reading aloud. I can also keep an eye on how they're responding and modify the presentation if I see I'm losing them.
Do you ever get asked difficult questions?
Oh yes. We always practice giving the presentation to colleagues to make sure everything's clear, and the people listening try to anticipate the client's questions by asking as many as they can think of, particularly difficult ones. That way we're hardly ever taken by surprise when we present to the clients.
Finally, Gary, what's the secret of an effective presentation?
Some people like to make it funny, but I think it's important to keep it clear, short and simple. People can't usually concentrate for longer than about 20 minutes, and you can't cover everything in that time anyway, so the detail can go in the written proposal package.
Gary Waters, many thanks.
Exam practice. Listening paper. Part 4.
Section 3. Questions 45 to 50. You will hear a radio news item about Ben Miller being appointed as the new European chairman of GTR, a big advertising group. For questions 45 to 50, circle one letter, A, B or C, for the correct answer. You will hear the news item twice. You have 20 seconds to read the questions. Now you will hear the news item.
First, some marketing news. Ben Miller, former creative director with American advertising group Jackson Media, is expected to move to the GTR marketing group in the newly created role of European chairman. The surprise move follows the launch of his own agency, Hudson, in the US earlier this year, in partnership with Susie Thomas. Miller confirms that he quit Hudson last week, but declined to comment on his new job. It's understood that he has yet to sign the contract. Inside sources at GTR suggest that Ben Miller won't be welcomed by everyone in the group. This appointment is unsettling, especially since it comes at a time when GTR is still in a state of transition. The company was only created last year as a result of a merger of 3 European and North American agencies, so it sorely needs stability and clear vision. It's felt by certain key GTR staff that the decision to appoint Miller was taken at the group's New York headquarters, without any discussion with senior management of the European division, whom Miller is expected to join in London. Miller's move to GTR will reunite him with the man he used to report to at Jackson Media, Mark West. In fact, West recruited Miller to join him in Jackson's Manhattan office, having done business with him sometime previously. West is now president and chief operating officer of GTR. West was ousted from Jackson Media at the beginning of last year, after investigations into the agency's finances by the US Securities and Exchange Commission, and Ben Miller left the company soon afterwards. Apparently, Miller didn't get on with West's successor, and when he left, he took some of Jackson Media's biggest clients with him, which gave Miller's own agency, Hudson, a good start. Hudson finds itself in trouble now that Miller has left. The agency was recently responsible for an advertising campaign on behalf of Yellowstone, the American food and drinks giant, and was expecting to pick up further business from the client. The initial deal was down to Yellowstone's 7-year relationship with Miller, built up while he was at Jackson Media. Yellowstone had subsequently moved their business to another agency, but Miller picked them up when he founded Hudson this year. Commentators are surprised at Miller's move, not only because it means leaving his own newly emerging agency, but also because there were rumours that he had been approached by the chairman of another big marketing agency, Outward Signs. It's thought that Outward Signs was interested in acquiring Hudson from Miller and his partner with a view to strengthening their own position. The agency is now expected to look elsewhere.
Now for news of the manufacturing industry.
Now you will hear the news item again.
First, some marketing news. Ben Miller, former creative director with American advertising group Jackson Media, is expected to move to the GTR marketing group in the newly created role of European chairman. The surprise move follows the launch of his own agency, Hudson, in the US earlier this year, in partnership with Susie Thomas. Miller confirms that he quit Hudson last week, but declined to comment on his new job. It's understood that he has yet to sign the contract. Inside sources at GTR suggest that Ben Miller won't be welcomed by everyone in the group. This appointment is unsettling, especially since it comes at a time when GTR is still in a state of transition. The company was only created last year as a result of a merger of 3 European and North American agencies, so it sorely needs stability and clear vision. It's felt by certain key GTR staff that the decision to appoint Miller was taken at the group's New York headquarters without any discussion with senior management of the European division, whom Miller is expected to join in London. Miller's move to GTR will reunite him with the man he used to report to at Jackson Media, Mark West. In fact, West recruited Miller to join him in Jackson's Manhattan office, having done business with him sometime previously. West is now president and chief operating officer of GTR. West was ousted from Jackson Media at the beginning of last year, after investigations into the agency's finances by the US Securities and Exchange Commission, and Ben Miller left the company soon afterwards. Apparently, Miller didn't get on with West's successor, and when he left, he took some of Jackson Media's biggest clients with him, which gave Miller's own agency, Hudson, a good start. Hudson finds itself in trouble now that Miller has left. The agency was recently responsible for an advertising campaign on behalf of Yellowstone, the American food and drinks giant, and was expecting to pick up further business from the client. The initial deal was down to Yellowstone's 7-year relationship with Miller, built up while he was at Jackson Media. Yellowstone had subsequently moved their business to another agency, but Miller picked them up when he founded Hudson this year. Commentators are surprised at Miller's move, not only because it means leaving his own newly emerging agency, but also because there were rumours that he had been approached by the chairman of another big marketing agency, Outward Signs. It's thought that Outward Signs was interested in acquiring Hudson from Miller and his partner with a view to strengthening their own position. The agency is now expected to look elsewhere. Now for news of the manufacturing industry.
Speaking Test Part 2. Exam Skills. Exercise 2B.
Well, I'm going to talk about the best office I've ever worked in. To start with, I should say that this office was in Bangalore. That's a city in southern India, and it was an office in quite a modern office block, not far from the city centre. I was working there as a graduate trainee, basically learning general management skills. That was before I became an assistant human resources manager, which is the job I do now, but here in Chennai and for a different company. So, as I was saying, I was there basically learning the job, or as you might say, general management. And to come to the main point of the question, what I most liked about the office was a combination of things. Firstly, the physical surroundings. It was a light, airy office on the 7th floor of the building. It was well decorated. I mean, it had good carpets on the floors, interesting pictures on the walls, and comfortable, ergonomic office furniture. And, of course, the latest computer equipment. So pretty well perfect as an office. Interestingly, it also had areas for workers to relax, a good canteen and a comfortable rest area. So you could say we were quite spoiled, although I think we probably worked harder and were more motivated as a result of feeling so well treated. The second thing which made it such a good office was that we, that is, the trainees, felt so motivated and stimulated. The place had a real buzz, and at that time the company was growing really fast, and we felt we were part of something which was going to give us great opportunities. Rightly, as it turned out. Finally, my fellow trainees, who were some of the most talented people I have ever met. All those things make that the best office I have ever worked in.